When did you realize that your paid professional was an absolute moron? I told my old therapist I didn't want to see her anymore, and she told me that without her I wouldn't even have any friends. When the roofer didn't bring a ladder. I ordered new windows to be installed in my attic, and the salesman who came to my house said that it'll be 6 weeks tops to get them in. 3 months later, they were delivered. When I spoke to the representative on the phone that I was unhappy about how much longer it actually took, and that their salesman had said 6 weeks, she said, "Oh, well, of course he said that. He's a salesman." My bankruptcy attorney was convinced that taxes paid had to be counted as income. Not gross pay, mind you. For example, gross pay is $1,000. $300 is taken for taxes, meaning you had a $700 check. He insisted this meant there was $1,300 in income to report. His reasoning was that there was an area later on the form to deduct taxes, and if we used the pre-tax number of $1,000, then after the deducted taxes it would only show a $700 income, which is clearly not the case since I made $1,000. Ugh. "Oh, was I not meant to do that? I didn't look at what you booked in for, I just assumed this is what you wanted," said a woman who is no longer my hairdresser. Well, mine marked the wrong wrist before surgery. The current position I have is by no means an entry-level one. When I was hired, I had to go through a rigorous 6-week training program. The first 2 weeks, though, our instructor was part of this other program where someone with much lower credentials is allowed to teach initial training to the much more experienced class in order to eventually be given a job at the position we were all training for. Makes sense, right? Anyways, anytime we had questions about anything, this instructor would say the words, "You're all getting too far ahead. We're going to talk about this next week." It took 2 days for us to figure out that our instructor didn't know the material and had no business attempting to teach us. I don't really understand this training program, but if you ask this junior instructor in the first 2 weeks something over his head, surely he's allowed to say that it's not something he's been trained in yet? Like, is this not something that's overseen if you have trainee trainers giving the class? I broke my arm and went to an orthopedic office. I didn't like them from the first appointment because I'd had an appointment and they made me wait 2 hours. Then they had their secretary take my past medical history, which is extremely complex, in the waiting room. On a follow-up appointment, the tech removed my cast. PA came in to assess my arm and went to my non-broken arm, assessed strength and range of motion and swelling, and told me it seemed to be healing nicely. I told her, that's great, since that one was never broken. Once she finished repeating the process on the arm that was actually broken, she sent the tech in to recast my arm. I had to stop the tech from casting my non-broken arm. On my appointment paperwork, she wrote that she recommended I take ibuprofen for pain relief. That was exactly like 2 sentences after where it stated, NSAIDs, like ibuprofen, cause life-threatening airway swelling for me. The same office wanted to charge me $50 every visit to sign a form that was literally one checkbox saying if I was cleared or not for full duty at work. One checkbox, no research required. I never went back. I figured out pretty quickly that I didn't like my driving instructor, but other people's horror stories about changing made me stick with him. 6 months of lessons being told off for minor errors and having the test dangled in front of me, but just out of reach, he finally said to me, "I just don't think you're going to be able to drive a manual car." He said this knowing full well that I'd already bought a manual car because I didn't expect to be learning for so long. He wrecked my confidence in driving, and it took me another 6 months to try again, and my new instructor had to then correct all the bad habits the first guy had taught me. He had no issue with my use of gears at all, and I passed first attempt. Screw you, Nick. A plumber in the middle of a job that had to drive back to the shop to get a part that was pretty basic, and then charged me for the time it took to do that, and then installed it incorrectly, and then returned a week later to fix the mistake and asked what idiot installed it that way, and then installed it wrong an entirely new way. Hey, some people like me, some don't. This was a boast from a doctor I saw when I injured my shoulder, and he said it was all in my head. I went to my GP to get a prescription for birth control. I suggested an IUD might be something I want because I'm very forgetful and pills didn't work out in the past. She refused to prescribe an IUD because I was a virgin and she didn't want to take my virginity away by inserting an IUD. I'm currently looking for a new GP, by the way. My car insurance company had an agent who reviewed my policy with me and while trying to get me to sign on to life insurance, wanted me to get an amount that would pay off my student loans and have my parents set for life. My parents. She refused to listen even when I told her nobody even co-signed my loans and that I have no contact with my financially comfortable, horrible, and healthy parents. I ended up writing a long email to the company, including wondering if they no longer wanted me as a customer. I took a job that sounded ideal on paper, but the CEO who I reported to gave off some very bad vibes very quickly. A lot of decisions he made were questionable at best. He wanted me to play clips from The Wolf of Wall Street to motivate the team, for example. But as soon as he told me he was altering people's targets midway through the month and withholding bonuses from certain team members, I was out of there. I was in the job for exactly 1 month, and on a Tuesday morning, I got into work and told him that I morally couldn't do it, and that if that was his decision, I didn't want to be part of it. 2 minutes later, I silently collected my things and left, feeling literally over the moon for doing so. I saw a doctor after a mental breakdown who told me I had anxiety, and then asked me if I'd tried not being anxious. I should specify that I only lost trust in this particular doctor. Once I changed doctors, I got a much better one. Although, to the other one's credit, while the comment wasn't helpful, they did recommend I see a psychiatrist. I dislocated my ankle and went to the hospital in an ambulance. When I got there, I was assessed and sent for X-ray. I got onto the bed and the tech started lining up the X-ray over my knee, so I told her I dislocated my ankle, not my knee, and she said that the chart said it was my knee. I replied that I'm pretty frickin' certain that the effed up foot that's hanging off is the problem, and that if she doesn't believe me, then to double check with the doctor because my knee is fine. She just kept repeating that if the chart says it's my knee, then that's what has to be X-rayed, and she's unwilling to double check. So, after a 2-hour wait for an X-ray, I went back to the doctor with pictures of my knee, and he was confused. So he goes to the X-ray tech and asks what the F she's playing at. She gives him the speech about how she just X-rays what it says on the chart. So he proceeds to chew her out, saying that if she's getting clearly conflicting information, then she has a duty to double-check to make sure she's doing the right thing. He said people make mistakes and this was an easy one to catch, but she's too much of a moron with no common sense to do anything about it. She was so angry at me as she took the X-ray of my ankle, saying I should have insisted she double-check, and I should have refused to do the X-ray until she did. That woman was completely incompetent. I was looking to hire an editor for one of my books last year. She corrected my grammar in the email I sent her, quite politely, I have to say. I think she thought it was some kind of audition piece, but she was just factually wrong about the mistake. I think it was the use of a colon instead of a semicolon. When I sent her a link to a couple of web pages that showed that actually the way I'd typed it was correct, she doubled down, got extremely snippy with me, and basically came back with, "You're hiring me to do a job, so I know better than you." I was like, "Which? I've done your job in the past. I know editing is a skill and deserves respect, but I'm paying you because I don't want to do it, not because I can't do it." There's nothing so hilarious as someone being confidently wrong, is there? For the record, even as a man who's been told that he writes well and has exhaustively Googled the topic, I feel a sense of anxiety when I write a semicolon, like I'm only mostly sure that I know what I'm doing with those specific little jerks. When I was a teenager in high school, I really wanted to apply for an astronomy camp program that summer, and you needed a letter of recommendation from a math or science teacher. My higher grade was in chemistry, so I asked her. She said she would, but be aware that she'd have to say I don't always focus on my work as I should. I said, fine, that was true. I worked really hard on the rest of the application and I got in. Ran to school in excitement to thank my teacher for her letter, and she couldn't hide her look of utter astonishment, and I realized what was up. A few months later, when at that camp, I nonchalantly asked the director, "She wrote me a bad letter, didn't she?" He immediately pulled me aside to say yes. It was so bad that it was a full page saying terrible things about my character and scholarship, so he knew to discount it, but wanted to let me know. Which was in fact good to know because I had an AP chemistry with her the next year and she kept doing stuff like that, getting me sent to the principal's office for a B- at the quarter. That still bothers me a bit to this day. I was your classic bright but bored kid and was obsessed with astronomy, and any educator worth their salt knows a kid who can't get good grades in chemistry class can thrive at a summer program. If she didn't want to write me a letter, one can just say no, but spending all that time writing a bad one? Pretty low thing to do to a kid. I'm actually an astronomer today, so screw her. And I'm still in touch with the camp director, and even work as a counselor some years when my schedule allows it. The same year I graduated, said teacher moved to New Jersey. I don't know where, and she had a very generic name, so no, I can't contact her or her employer, and I've no reason to believe that she isn't still teaching students today. Sad. My mum has always had amazingly manicured nails. She did them herself and they always looked perfect. I took her to many of her doctor's appointments as she got older and witnessed a nurse launch into her about the dangers of acrylic nails, especially for a diabetic like Mum. Mum told her, and I told her again and again, those aren't acrylic, they're just her nails. Yet she kept on telling Mum that she needed to get rid of the fake nails. I've never before witnessed such a stunning display of a complete failure to listen. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was planning a kitchen renovation in the apartment building I used to live in, and I had a plumber in to give advice and estimates. I lived on the ground floor of a 5-story complex. I wanted to relocate the sink, and doing so would take it from one side of a structural column to the other. It was a wooden building, and these internal columns were typically 6 2x6s nailed together. I was trying to come up with a clever way to reroute the plumbing, and this guy just grinned and said, "Just cut through it and don't tell anyone." I smiled, thanked him for his time, and don't let the door hit your butt on the way out, pal. I went to my therapist once and told her about my depression and how I didn't want to be alive anymore. I explained how I couldn't bring myself to do things, even small things I used to love doing, because I just couldn't be bothered to live. She suggested I was just lazy. I tried to defend myself, but ultimately I just agreed because she wouldn't listen to me. Flash forward another few months, I finally told her my story of being attacked by my father, after not having told anyone about it my entire life, and after one half-hour session she said I should just be over it and to stop talking about it and move on. About 20 years ago, I had a well-known nurse practitioner who was married to one of the doctors in the practice. I'd developed a weird combination of symptoms along with a silent strep infection. Anyway, she came in telling me about people she knew, giving first and last names and asking if I knew them, and telling me about their strep infections and symptoms and stuff. That was the last time I made an appointment with her. I knew it was straight up illegal to talk about other people's medical conditions, and it made me wonder who she told about mine. Horrible, horrible woman who thought she was untouchable because she was well off and married to a doctor. I have a relative who's a plumber. My sister's sink got messed up somehow and he came over, looked at it, went to the store down the street and got a $5 replacement part and fixed it for her. He told her that he would have charged an actual customer around $300 for what he fixed and would have stayed under the sink for more than 30 minutes pretending to be busy. I don't trust plumbers at all anymore. High school guidance counselor here. I was talking to her about what schools I was applying to. I said, "So I'm looking at these state and city schools as my backups, but I'm mostly looking at this private school because they send me—" She scoffs, interrupting me. "Honey, your family could never afford a private school." I pause and finish my sentence. "A letter offering a full academic scholarship." You don't need shaded safety glasses, as I was staring into a 2,500-degree furnace. My professor said it's not her job to grade our papers correctly. "You need a diet of 1,000 calories split into 5 small meals, no fat at all, and you need to do some video trainings with Male B," said a professional and certified sport dietitian whom I visited because I wanted to have a professional weightlifting training plan and diet. Stupid me actually tried to follow this diet for 3 months and stopped it after fainting several times during the day. This happened around the early 2010s in Poland. It turned out you don't need any certification to call yourself a dietitian here, or at least there was none back then. I was a petite girl who loves running, with no weight problems at all, and just wanted to find someone to introduce me to weightlifting. There were more red flags I skipped because I was young and naive, such as the dietitian office being in a shady part of town, and weird food restrictions like, "You're only allowed 100 grams of meat per day. No eggs, no bread, no fruit at all. But if you need to make a cheat meal because you need to take your customers for a business lunch, then fine, eat whatever, but no carbs." Followed by some motivational bullcrap. I remember I lost about 3 kgs in my first week, and then the weight loss stopped. I regained 2 kilos back and was able to lose them again on a rational reduction diet made by an actual professional clinical dietitian I visited later. Oh gosh darn it. The narrator was aware that often nutritionists were full of crap and didn't need a qualification to call themselves such, but he kind of thought that dietitians were the ones that you could trust. Then again, this video is full of licensed medical professionals who are ignorant or just negligent as all hell, so maybe this is an example of a similarly qualified individual who was just bad at their job. Oh, the car salesman who said, "You don't need to worry about these new diesel laws. We all drive diesels and it really won't change anything." 10 minutes later, he happened to slip in, "Oh, I drive an M3. I'd repeatedly gone to my GP about this nagging pain in my arm. He did some blood work to check for vitamin deficiency and sent me for an X-ray, which didn't show anything. He then decided my pain must be because I was an anxious female. On my last visit, I mentioned I'd also been struggling to breathe properly and had some chest pain and was starting to get quite concerned. He said, "You're just anxious. But what do you have to be anxious about? You have a husband with a good job." And he sent me on my way with a prescription for Zoloft. 2 days later, I was in the ER being diagnosed with pulmonary embolism, and now I have a new doctor. At 17, I had a long history of migraines and then came down with a pretty severe vitamin D deficiency, which for some reason caused my migraines to come back after 4 years of having them under control. So I went with my mum to a neurologist. Our appointment was at 1:30 and my mum had a haircut appointment later at 5:30. So we get to the neurologist's office at 1 to fill out paperwork and stuff. We aren't called back until 4. When we get into the office, the doctor takes another 45 minutes to even show up. When he does, he isn't at all apologetic and starts saying that, based on my file, what I've been experiencing probably isn't migraines and they aren't a problem. Right off the bat, we could tell he's an arrogant jerk. After about 15 minutes of him questioning me and writing off my symptoms as a coincidence, what the frick, my mum says, "Look, we waited hours to see you and I've got other plans to get to tonight. Are you actually going to be helpful?" To which the doctor responds by nagging my mum into telling him what other plans she has. She says a haircut. "Listen, woman, what's more important, your hair or your son's life?" Considering the fact that he'd been completely disregarding everything that I was telling him about my headaches, it was apparent that my life didn't matter to him. Needless to say, we won't be going back to him again. A religious professional therapist once told me that the only reason I was depressed is because God was disappointed in me. "Oh, thanks, man. I was going to self-delete last night, but I'm really glad I didn't so I could hear you say that." If you go on birth control and give up Johnnies, you'll become immune to pregnancy. Also, going to church will help treat your condition, said a pretty expensive OBGYN. When I was 23, I was hospitalized for an episode of acute pancreatitis. My doctor at the time was convinced I was an alcoholic. At the hospital, he asked me to tell him about my drinking. I told him I didn't drink, because I didn't. I was always the designated driver, I don't like drinking or feeling drunk. He sent my parents and grandparents away and then said, "Now you can tell me the truth. How much are you drinking?" I repeated the above. I don't drink. He got frustrated and left. The next few appointments when I offered up explanations for why I was getting pancreatitis, he belittled them and refused to listen to me or investigate further. When I asked how I could prevent another episode, he told me to eat carbs and stop drinking. No matter what I said, his solution was that I just needed to stop drinking. A year later, I was hospitalized again for another episode of pancreatitis. This time I was in another city. I told the doctor that my family has a history of cystic fibrosis, that my uncle and multiple cousins have cystic fibrosis, and pointed out the link between pancreatitis and cystic fibrosis. This doctor, unlike the first, listened to me and tested my DNA for CF markers. Guess why I got pancreatitis? I have the CF markers in my DNA and multiple CFTR-related conditions. Take that, idiot. I don't drink. I was frickin' right. I never saw the first doctor again, and I got everyone else in my family to see someone else as well. I took my kids to a local optician for years. I queried a few times with them about glasses as I felt they couldn't see very well as they were getting older. Some glasses were given, but they were only to wear them if they absolutely had to. So cue my kids not really wearing them at all. The advice was that this would strengthen their eyes and hopefully reverse their short-sightedness. I took them to the races. They couldn't see a thing, what horses were running, the boards with the winner placings on them. So I took them straight to a new optician who immediately gave them glasses and contact lenses for permanent use and who was horrified with the old optician's advice. Apparently your eyes get worse if you don't wear glasses when you're short-sighted, not better. I still don't understand how they were managing at school. My father had just passed away after deciding he didn't want to be alive anymore. I was 14. I really struggled to get through a full week of school. My attendance was pretty shocking. My psychiatrist said to my mum, "Don't worry, she doesn't need an education. She's pretty." This fueled my mum to get me right back into school. I frickin' love my mum. When a career motivator had a chat with me asking about what I wanted to do for the future, by the way, I was 18 and about to apply for uni, I said, mechanical engineering. But I didn't hold on the it was just like the natural you fit into any sentence. He then said in the most overconfident, condescending manner, "Nope, you stuttered, therefore you're not sure and this is not a career for you. Look elsewhere, son." Oh, gee, thanks, mystical man. I'ma just drop my plans for the next 40 years of my life over a stutter. By the way, I just made it into my dream uni for a mechanical engineering degree, so screw you, you basic YouTube motivation channel copycat hack. Veterinary clinic. So, what's wrong with your cat? I was holding a rabbit. Her face got really red afterwards. It was just most likely a brain toot. As an out for her, my wife had tried buying cat litter and cat food for the rabbit, until I reminded my wife that we had a rabbit. Maybe my rabbit just looks like a cat. I asked a doctor about medicine for a condition, and she told me all about the power of faith and how it's so helpful to her. Last visit. Look, faith is an incredibly important part of people's lives, and I have no problem with it, but when I'm paying for a doctor's visit, I want some gosh darn doctoring, with actual science and stuff. A dermatologist once told me that my psoriasis would go away if I dumped my girlfriend and quit my job. That isn't really an answer, and it makes sense what the follow-up was. He prescribed me shampoo to fix my feet. He then argued with me about where my psoriasis was presenting. It was on my hands and feet, yet he insisted it was on my head under my hair. I am a bald man. What's the most disturbing thing you've found when working on someone else's computer? MS Paint being used to design the company logo. A buddy wanted me to convert a hard drive to an external. Needed some copying and formatting. He had tons of pictures of Arctic sea life. It was like every walrus, seal, or aquatic life form on Google image search was saved to his hard drive. I'm pretty sure he did it to mess with me. Was it originally his C drive? It was probably made by Seagate. I work as an accountant now, but in a former life I did a stint in tech support. I remember getting a report that a printer, a LaserJet 5P, was constantly jamming. I arrived and started checking all the usual spots for paper fragments to get stuck in rollers. I flipped down the back cover and a chunk of fried chicken fell out. I still have no idea. I had a customer who wanted me to find pictures of her son's eggplant on the computer. The long version of the story is, the son had gotten in legal trouble in the past for sending unsolicited pictures of his twig and berries to anyone and everyone. He wasn't allowed to use the internet on the computer, but as his parents were computer illiterate, they had no idea whether or not he was doing it again, and they wanted to find out. I ended up writing her instructions and showing her how to search for herself, as searching for pictures of her underage son's wang was in ethically murky waters. It was a good thing I did too, because she ended up finding some. I really wonder the legal grounds for that. I'm fairly certain it would not be illegal. The actual illegal act of child prawn is when you're sharing it or consuming it. It's not when you stumble upon it. So I think you would have been fine. Very strange story though. Half an inch of fluffy, sticky white gunk coating every inch of the interior. It was a podiatrist's office. It was next to a sort of booth where they would grind the calluses off old people's feet. I didn't know that when I opened it up, I just knew that it smelled faintly of burnt hair. This is uniquely gross, and I have no words other than the ones currently coming out of my mouth. What can I say? It deserved acknowledgement. Also, there are a few stories where we'll be using the word prawn as a placeholder for its similar-sounding word meaning adult content used for the gratification of those with time on their hands. Case in point, I was setting up my grandfather's printer and he warned me, "There's a lot of prawns on there," meaning on the PC. I laughed and showed him how to delete his search history. I had a girl ask to use my computer and I was like, "Hell no, there's so much prawns on this thing." And she goes, "I don't care." Motherfricky, you just don't do that to people. You don't care if I watch prawns, but you will care if you see all the kinds of prawns that I watch. We ain't talking Playboy here. My dad has his own software company and does tech support for it and general computer repairs for anyone who drops by his office. Don't know what's the most disturbing thing he's come across, but I was present when a man dropped his mother's laptop. Dad booted it up and immediately encountered a common problem. It was password protected. So he asks the son for the password. The son has to call his mum to get it. The mum tells the son, who has to relay it to my dad. Suck Big Wang 2014. Read a story on here about a Geek Squad type guy who found a bunch of gory murder scene photos. Turned out the guy was a homicide detective though. Call it professional courtesy, but I feel like that's probably something you should give a heads up about. I don't do the job anymore, but once I did an install where they ordered Adult Channel for their service. No big deal, but as soon as I get there he starts, "You have the channel on there, right?" And I look at the order and say, "Yeah." So I'm doing the install and his wife offers me a drink and food. I turn it down, we're supposed to, it's job policy. I also did a virus check on their computer. So after I finish the install for the cable, he says, "Okay, now show us the channel." Usually people wait for us to leave, so it was weird to look up the channel and watch prawns in a guy's house with his wife on a 65-inch TV. So I excuse myself to work on the computer. As soon as I log in, the last page he was on was importing foreign women for doing the deed, like mail-order brides. The next tab was for Group Whoopee, and the next tab was for Craigslist. I didn't go too far into it because it was just really awkward as I heard the sounds from the TV downstairs. So when I go to leave, him and his wife don't look at me and they are fixated on the teeming prawns on the television. I say my goodbye speech, but they don't even turn. It was just weird all round for me. Pictures of graveyards at night and a guy with a hood and torch walking in them and digging. Plans detailing a prospective campus rampage on the same computer as very sweet emails to his grandmother. He had self-deleted 2 months prior and I was recovering data for his family. I didn't tell them. The guy was severely overweight. I found before and after shaving pictures of his crotch and butthole. I couldn't even look him in the eye when I handed his computer back to him. I did computer work for 8 years. Conservatively, I serviced around 1,000 machines a year. I never went digging through the computer or anything, but I stumbled upon CP 3 times. Do some thinking to figure out what CP could stand for on a person's computer and why we'd arrest someone for it. We had a contact at the local FBI and there was a quarantine procedure to preserve chain of custody and all of that. However, if you really want to gross people out in the office, mention Mr. Santa. This guy had a super slow PC, which was one of the reasons he brought it in. From power on to being able to open the start menu was 45 minutes. The only problem is, his desktop was a full-screen image of himself wearing a Santa hat, and only a Santa hat. He was rather large and had hundreds of warts everywhere. God damn. Guy was having problems with his computer, so he brought it to us for a virus removal. Standard stuff, I set it up with a monitor, keyboard, and left it to boot up. When I came back, it had booted to desktop. The background was a picture of a guy, not the customer, fully undressed and spread eagle. I've never switched a monitor so fast. I'm working Geek Squad years ago. This guy comes in, tatted up head to toe, not your punk band tattoos, fully blown multi-years in prison tattoos. Plops down his tower. "I heard you do data backup. How much to back up all of my prawns?" I see labor dollars and without missing a beat, I seize his crustacean folder and quote him $160 to put it into 2 DVD discs. The manager rips me a new one, not sure why, labor dollars are huge, and go to his bonus, and says I have to do the work. Whatever, I just copy the files over. I didn't even see anything, it's just file names whizzing by. Well, one caught my eye. Piegrape.avi. Pie as in P-I, grape? Crap. What is this, I think? Some sort of math prawn? Sure enough, I fire it up. I have to see what it is. A woman comes out in a nightgown and takes it off, rubs something between her legs, lays down and spreads them. Before you know it, a full-blown pig rolls into the scene, jumps on the bed, and the rest is history. Then I realized in the split second what the file name was on my screen. I misread it and can never unsee it. And thank God you misread it, because frankly, I'm still not sure it's okay to put this one in one of our videos. Oh well, YOLO! My grandmother passed away recently, and my 87-year-old grandfather got a new girlfriend, 27 years younger than him, about 2 months after she died. I was setting up a printer for his laptop, and in his bookmarks he had a few links to marital aid distributors. So now I know that my grandfather does the deed far more often than I do, and needs medication to get it up. Which makes sense, I suppose. Old people be doing it all the time. Sure, but I would rather be willfully ignorant of my grandfather's bedroom life. Sort of like how some parents prefer to pretend that their children have never ever done the deed and never want to. Found a folder on my mum's computer titled Sins of My Children, found weird poetry and if I recall correctly, chat logs of some guy offering to kill my wife and me. Holy crap, man, you can't just post that and not elaborate. Are relations okay with your mother now? My mother has always hated my wife. We were trying to get through it by going to a museum together. My mum said a friend of hers was going to meet up with us there, but he never showed up. Then later I found the folder when I was fixing her computer. I barely talk to her now. My cousin worked for a summer doing IT stuff for her mum's company. She worked on a co-worker's laptop and discovered explicit emails indicating he was sleeping with her mum, who was still married to her dad. I was asked to double-check a bunch of computers for pictures and identifying information before recycling the towers. Found a Windows 98 machine that hadn't seen the internet in a very long time, and on it was Napster, just like we choose to remember it, along with ICQ, Yahoo Messenger, and CompuServe. I found a load of prawns while working on a client's computer. Lots of browsers cuts and fragments of videos. I came to find out he wasn't obsessed with shellfish at all, he was an editor for browsers. A photo album full of polar bears with Coke bottles photoshopped onto their hands, like very badly done. About 40 photos, and I was just trying to update a friend's drivers and couldn't resist opening the folder called Coke Bears. A relative once asked me to help find some files on her very cluttered hard disk. When a search failed me, I started browsing through folders when I found it. Pictures of pillows. Every single kind of pillow possible, with lots of different colors and decorations. There were literally thousands of pictures, including some with what looked like bloodstains on them. I worked at a law firm, started getting calls in the morning that some random attorneys could not log in. When we checked out their computer, it turns out that they were ignoring their username, which was defaulted to the last user logged in. It turned out someone was logging in as user library. Checked out the law library, and sure enough, a sticky note with the library username and password existed just above the monitor. This routine persisted for a few more weeks as I tried to figure out how to catch the culprit. Sure, I could disable the account, but then we'd never find out who's ducking into random offices surfing prawns. That was in the cache of the library user account name on the local machine. We used a startup script called Kickstart, highly configurable to do whatever you need it to do. So I added to the startup script to email the administration group whenever the library user logs in. First night, I get the email. Late at night, I call security and ask them to check our floor. Nothing too unusual. We asked them to check floors occasionally due to stuck open doors from positive airflow, etc. They replied back, all clear. Huh, weird. Okay. Second night, same story, nothing unusual reported back from security. However, the next morning I came in to a request from an attorney to help him log in. Same computer from the night before, default user, you guessed it, library. This attorney had poor eyesight. As I'm clicking away, checking out the browsing history our mystery library user left behind, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A couple of dabs of Elmer's glue. It's early, pre-coffee. What's an attorney doing with glue? Then I realize what I'm staring at. Not glue. I threw up in my mouth a little. Fast forward a week and it happens again. Email notification late at night, security called, also notice another attorney logged in a few offices down. I called him immediately and asked him to check the office where we just saw the library logged in. He checks and reports back a few minutes later. Nothing unusual, just a security guard. I just called security no less than 2 minutes before. No way they could get to the top floor in time to check up on our request. It was the security guard yanking on his brake. I notified the building manager the following morning. They pulled him in, questioned him, and he admitted his guilt. He was dismissed immediately. In short, public log-on on a post-it note in the office. Someone used it to serve shellfish material and splooged on a desk at night. Turns out it was the security guard. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I placed my hand on the user's mouse and my hand stuck to it due to lubricant on the mouse. Computer itself could hardly function due to prawn pop-ups. My friend's mum. 7 antivirus programs installed. Internet Explorer has 6-inch tall of toolbars. I have to note that me and her son both have masters in computer engineering. He always tried to educate her, but she would just get mad. He gave up. The fact that she is still using Internet Explorer means that she was just a lost cause, sadly. 52 gigabytes of prawns, 1 terabyte of gore. I never touched that computer again.
1 terabyte of Al Gore? I had no idea there was that much.
I had a coworker that wanted me to come by his house to fix his PC. This was like 15 years ago. He takes me up to his bedroom, not too unusual. He was having internet connection issues. I was so focused on checking cabling to his modem, router, and other things under the desk that it took me a while to also notice next to the desk the camera on a tripod, pointed at the bed. It all clicked when I finally got the interwebs working again, launched his browser, and his homepage was some couples sharing special interest website. My grandma was having problems. I looked at her history and there was a crap ton of gang-clanging prawns.
Hey, she's old, not dead.
I work in a senior day center, but I used to do software development, so every now and then one of the other staff will ask me to fix whatever computer problems they're having. One time, one of the nursing assistants asked me to look at her laptop and had brought it in. I told her I'd look at it during my lunch break, different time from hers, and she said, fine. So I opened up the thing in the break room only to be confronted with a bunch of windows with very exposed pictures of her and her boyfriend, the topmost picture being his BBC. Fortunately, the only person in the room was across the table and couldn't see anything, but I noped the heck out of there. I gave her a bit of crap for potentially getting me fired, but it was kind of fun to have her squirm knowing what I'd seen. I lent a friend the use of my laptop for a 3-hour game of D&D. He used a site called Fur Affinity to download lots of Third Reich dog prawns. Drawings of Dobermen in those uniforms doing the deed with each other. When I confronted him, he said, "You'd think there'd be more German Shepherds." Not me, but a friend borrowed his lieutenant's computer while we were deployed in Iraq. Found a lot of inappropriate material featuring minors in it. Pictures of him teabagging other soldiers while they were sleeping, you know, the usual. Yeah, he's a level 2 unspeakable act offender now. A video of 3 guys helping a goat commit the unspeakable act on a person. They walked the guy out the door 15 minutes later. A customer bought in his old HP tower and it absolutely reeked. A smell I can't even describe accurately, but it would be something along the lines of decaying ball bag cheese built up after a week of not showering and high-intensity training. Anyhow, we don't work on it yet that day, but end up having to wrap it in garbage bags and duct tape every opening to stop it from stinking up the tech shop. The next day we came in and the bag was slightly open. The entire store stinks of this now, and we had to open all the doors and set up fans for airflow the entire day. We unwrap the PC and connect it to power, after which a green-orange flume of debris comes out of the power supply fan, making a smell that has the original stench seeming tolerable. As one brave tech gets close to press the CD drive button, as soon as he touches it you hear rustling, and as soon as the drive tray opens, it was literally like you see in horror movies. A river of cockroaches pouring out of the open mouth of this PC. We yanked the power cords and ran it outside, as well as spending the next 4 months trying different kinds of extermination to get rid of the infestation in our store. It was so bad an event that the entire store full of introverted and non-confrontational techies managed enough bravery to call the guy up and actually tell him how unacceptable it was and that he needs to get his crap and leave. The guy responded, "Oh, it's not that bad really," but didn't give up much of a fight other than that. I can't even begin to imagine how awful of conditions this guy must have lived in to have a PC this bad. I don't even know how the thing functioned. This was even worse than the guys we caught with underage prawns, which we were required to report to authorities for you sickos that think that's okay. Similar story, we had a guy bring a PS4 that wasn't working into my store. We had pretty much accepted that we couldn't repair it, but he wanted his game out of it. We broke it open and found a nest of roaches. Quadruple bagged that crap and told him he needed to take it away. I worked at a repair shop as well. I don't know what it is with PS4s, but something about them attracts cockroaches. I've seen multiple PS4s with cockroaches and no Xboxes. No computers either, just PS4s. While I was in high school, I also worked for the school district as a student computer tech. My English teacher said her friend's computer was acting up and they wanted some help. After some general tinkering with settings, dumping caches, defragging disks, and uninstalling some bloatware, I determined they could use a clean install of their operating system. So I started to copy all their files to an external drive and was prepping a new partition to install the OS on. Well, you know those neat previews of the files you're transferring? I started seeing nothing but weird 80s clown prawn. Yeah, did I mention I was doing this at my school too? Ended up just locking the computer in a closet for the remainder of the file transfers and configured the computer with all their files and pretended I didn't see a thing when I gave it back. A neighbor asked to have their son's computer looked at because it kept blue screening. I agreed and braced myself for a bunch of prawns. The kid was 14. Nothing. A crap load of video games, but not a crustacean to be seen. What kind of 14-year-old boy who owns his own PC doesn't have prawns? The kind of 14-year-old that knows it's possible to stream his various shrimps and lobsters and not have them saved permanently to your computer for people like you to find. Seriously, I mean, who the frick downloads and saves their aquatic invertebrate these days? Honestly, at the age of 14, I didn't have this kind of sea-dwelling fauna anywhere on my personal PC. That's a later teenage thing in my head. A friend of my dad asked me if I could take a look at their family computer because Windows kept complaining about running out of disk space while there was nothing on there. I took a quick peek and indeed, not much going on. Barely any programs installed, no games on the C drive. There were some games installed on Steam through their 16-year-old son, but he was smart enough to place them on a second drive. Videos folder completely empty, picture folder empty, documents looked fairly clean. So I download Windowstat, and to my surprise it finds nearly 175 gigs of data in the documents folder. At this point, I already knew what was going on here, and I told the dad who was standing beside me that it would take a while, so he offered to go and pick up some food for us, 3. His son was home too, and left. There was a folder for save files from GTA 3 with 175 GB of images hidden in it. 175 gigs of exotic prawn, nicely organized in multiple subfolders by name, type, etc. I moved the folder in its entirety to the other partition under some random name and had a little chat with their son. He was so embarrassed but promised me he would keep them somewhere safe from now on. I just told the dad that there were tons of log files being generated by some app that didn't work right, and kept it at that. I used to work at the Apple store, and one of my co-workers was running a diagnostic on an iMac and found 100 gigs worth of illegal material featuring minors. The store contacted the police and a sting operation was set up. He was arrested at the store and later convicted. The co-worker needed to take some time off though, as he had 2 little kids and was pretty traumatized by what he saw. Freshman year of college, a few of us were hanging out in one of our dorm rooms and we got on the subject of music. The guy who lived there mentioned that his roommate listened to some really weird techno kind of music, but it was actually pretty cool. So he got on the computer to try and find it. They were friends and they got along well, so he knew the password. Anyway, he got his external and it turns out the guy has tons of music saved. Eventually, we see a folder called something in German, so we decided to check it out, thinking it might be the techno music. What we found were about 20 to 30 pictures of the same undressed guy. Some of them were with women and some of them were just him by himself. But the shocking thing about it was that his eggplant was at least 10 inches and it was curved a complete 90 degrees to one side. Not like a tight right angle, but it tapered around and the tip bent to face completely to the side. We confronted him about it and apparently he had a bunch of prawns saved on there and he had just stumbled on this dude somewhere and thought it was weird, so he saved a bunch of pictures of him. In short, college dorm mate had a thing for huge bent wangs. We found his stash and called him Curvature Joe for the rest of our time at uni. He had a folder on his computer entitled Barely Regal, devoted to racy photos of Sarah Ferguson, former Duchess of York. Was helping my mum with something on her phone once, did the thing to open all the apps running in the background so I could close them. Saw an undressed picture of her that she probably sent to her boyfriend. And I'm ruined. I recycle work computers frequently for the next employee that they get assigned to. So many prawns. According to my grandfather's search history, he likes fat old B-words. Truth be told, I was just glad that his searches were age-appropriate. What's the most unprofessional thing a doctor has said to you? It wasn't so much something he said as something he did. I came in for a suspected broken leg and he had a couple of residents with him. After the x-ray and having already found out my leg was indeed broken, he grabs my leg and looks to the residents and says, "An old but reliable method for diagnosing a broken leg is to place a hand on the ankle, a hand on the knee, and place your knee in the center, then pretend like you're trying to break a stick. If they yell, their leg is broken." He actually fricking did it to me 3 times to teach these residents. I haven't been back to him since. Bro, I would have punched him if he'd tried that crap. I'm not a violent person, but he's literally talking about pushing a broken bone with his knee. That's bullcrap. Dude, that's only part of it. The whole reason I had to go to him, family doctor, is because the hospitals screwed my stuff up. The day I broke it, I went to the hospital and had it x-rayed. They said I'd just bruised the bone but didn't break it. They sent me home with some meds and that was that. Well, 1 month later, it was still hurting just as bad. So I went to the doctor from my original comment. Like I said, he diagnosed my broken leg. I'd been walking around on said broke leg without a cast for 1 month. It even grew back crooked. I even paid the hospital $500 for their x-ray. I guess the moral of the story is that if you're a 240-pound man, don't play on rope swings. Well, F me sideways. I got an x-ray of my back and hips. The doctor's first time seeing them was with me in the room. These words, folks, is how I found out that my back was broke. To explain, one of my legs is shorter than the other, so my hips don't align. Anything involving moving my hips since I was a kid has basically made the base of my spine grind against itself. By the time we figured this out, my L4 and L5 disc had nearly degenerated to nothing, and my sciatic nerve was basically sitting there waving at everyone without any protection in that area.
Yeah, I had something very similar when I broke bones in my elbow. The radiologist asked if I could straighten it out. I told him I couldn't, so he snapped a couple of x-rays. With a look of horror, he exclaimed, "Holy frick! No wonder you can't move it. Just keep it still till we can get the orthopedic surgeon on call." I had a leading allergy specialist say to me, "Well, I'll be effed if I know," after a lengthy investigation over several weeks into my post-nasal drip issues. He'd tried everything and was all out of ideas. I didn't mind at all, in fact, I rather appreciated his honesty. It's probably quite telling that a lot of these in a row are just doctors using the F word to underline the fact that they haven't been able to diagnose. And yeah, I'm fine with the language to state the irritating nature of the problem. Another commenter agrees. Similar thing happened with my father-in-law. Men in that family have huge heads and thick necks. Not fat, just structurally over-engineered. He was having neck pain and went in to get a surgery consult after seeing other doctors. The doctor comes in for the consult, takes one look and says, "If my head was that big, my neck would hurt too." My father-in-law fell over laughing and they had a great working relationship from there on out working through the recovery. The doctor was doing a pap smear and he said, "Whoa," at one point while the speculum was in. I never did find out why, but I'm assuming he was just amazed by my awesome lady parts. "I need you to be fully firm," referring to my wang. I was referred to a urologist for Peyronie's disease. I believe my Johnson had been developing a bend in it. As part of his assessment, the urologist gave me an injection in the named part and some adult magazines. He left me alone in the room so I could become excited. Then he returned and used a toy to make me fully firm. However, when I told him I was on the verge of arriving, he just kept going and I splooched. Then he took some measurements with plastic rulers. He said that he needed to do this to take reference measurements to see if my condition is worsening. I have no idea what measurements he took because I was frankly overwhelmed by the experience. For him to look at my stiff eggplant didn't seem completely implausible. After all, I couldn't see a problem unless I was at full mast. Getting me fully firm, well, that was stretching my credibility. And when he kept going until I arrived, that just didn't make any sense. I asked about this on an online urology forum and found that this is so far outside of ethical practice that nobody would take me seriously. They assumed that I was just trying to share some fantasy I'd created. Nobody believed that a urologist would act this way. I'm not gay, and if I was trying to create a fantasy, I could probably do much better than him. I'm so sorry he did that to you. There is no excuse for doing that. He betrayed your trust and disregarded your dignity and wishes. I don't know what the legal boundary is, but this feels like he could be fired for that. You didn't consent to that, and there was no appropriate reason for him to have done that. Please report him. Don't worry about whether they believe you or not, which is out of your control. If anyone else reports him, your reports will back each other's up. I just wanted to add, and you probably know this, that this was completely his fault. You trusted him to behave professionally. He shouldn't have used the toy on you. He should have left it with you, stood outside the door, and said to let him know when you were ready for him to examine you. I'm so sorry you experienced this. Went to a psychiatrist because I wanted to self-delete. He said, "Well, you don't seem sad. I can't really help." You know how to spread 'em. I was at the gyno's office and needed to open my legs a little more in the stirrups during the examination. Wow, that's inappropriate.
My mom's first gyno appointment with an elderly male doctor, she didn't really want to open her legs to him. He said,
"You really think you've got something down there that I haven't seen before?" He turned out to be a really good doctor, and my mom uses the story to remind me to not be embarrassed of crap that everyone has.
Not said, but done. I was at the pediatrician having a physical. A youngish, probably late 20s to early 30s, attractive to my brain, blonde woman doctor gives me a physical. It comes time to turn my head and cough. I have become excited in anticipation. She does the whole check for hernia thing, then just before telling me I can pull my pants up, she flicks the head of my wang down with her finger, springing it like a dive board. She smiles slightly and continues on with the rest of the physical like nothing else happened. I don't know if she was trying to make my 12-year-old mind feel at ease about the embarrassing, to me anyway, situation, but I've never forgotten about that moment.
During my first physical at about the same age, my female doctor counted my testes, saying, 1 thingy-dingy, 2 thingy-dingies, probably trying to put me at ease, but it was so weird and out of place.
Look, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to call you on my phone later on this evening and we'll discuss options off the book. It's my personal number, so I would appreciate it if you kept it to yourself. Highly unprofessional, but hugely helpful. Best doctor I've met, for sure.
Is that unprofessional?
I had a doctor who knew I suffered from terrible allergies and sinus inflammations every spring, and I was getting married.
She scrounged around for pharmaceutical samples of anti-allergy and sinus medication for me, and of course didn't charge me for them, and gave me her personal number telling me to call her over the weekend if my symptoms worsened, and she'd see what else she could come up with. Turns out I didn't need it. The stuff she gave me worked great, but I appreciated the gesture. Didn't occur to me that this was unprofessional. I thought it was just going above and beyond as a doctor. I would say get a vibe check if you do get an offer like that from a doctor at the very least. That kind of situation could easily be taken in a very different and much worse direction. I'm glad it worked for both of these people. I had a positive pregnancy test and went to my OB to get a blood test confirmation. Standard practice is to repeat the blood test after 48 hours to see if your HCG levels have doubled, which indicates the pregnancy is progressing normally. About 10 minutes before my second blood draw, I received a call from my OB's office. Since I was already in the hospital parking garage at the time, I decided to just go into the office to see what the call was about. In the waiting room, full of patients, a nurse decided to tell me that I was going to lose the baby, and they called me because they wanted to save me the trouble of getting my blood drawn. I made her draw my blood anyway, knowing that there was no way they could diagnose that with only half the information. Then proceeded to walk out of the office in tears in front of everyone who had just heard what she'd told me. Sure enough, my numbers had doubled. They unfortunately continued to fluctuate after that, which indicated that I was not having a miscarriage, but an ectopic pregnancy. Undiagnosed, an ectopic pregnancy can lead to serious complications, including rupture of the fallopian tube, internal bleeding, and potential death. I continued to go to that OB because my doctor was amazing, but that nurse is on my crap list forever. That nurse deserves to be fired. If everyone heard her tell you about the miscarriage, that's a massive privacy violation, in addition to her being horribly callous and an idiot. Did you tell your doctor about it? Because I'd assume most good doctors wouldn't want someone like that on their staff. I did tell my doctor about it in regards to the confusion it created, but in all the stress and turmoil of getting a proper diagnosis and treatment, following up on what happened to her was the last thing on my mind. My doctor was incredibly sympathetic. I haven't seen that nurse around the office since then. This happened back in January, and at about 18 weeks into a viable pregnancy at this point, I've received really wonderful care from the staff that I've interacted with this time around. If I do happen to see her roaming the hallways, I might just chew her out and blame it on the hormones. When the doctor told my dad that he had cancer in various spots, including his bladder, colon, lymph nodes, and prostate, my mum started crying, obviously. The doctor sneered at my mum and told her to get a grip. Fricking butthole. My dad's okay, by the way. Well, you're sitting here talking and smiling, you can't be that depressed, said by my psychiatrist a few years ago. Yeah, frick that. It's not hard to learn to slap on a happy face in public so people stop asking questions. I did it for years. Right? That was probably the third thing he said to me. He hasn't even asked me a question other than, "Why are you here today?" I've had the worst luck with shrinks, too. Repeatedly asked if I could be pregnant when I was like, I have messed up periods, yo. I'm a lesbian and in a committed relationship with another woman. There's no chance in heck I could be with child, stop asking. My endocrinologist, I have hypothyroidism, is trying to figure out the messed up periods, but I've had them for ages. I badly burned my hand in the college cafeteria and went to the campus health office. I showed skin literally dripping off my hand, begging for a cream or bandage or anything to ease the pain. After making sure I wasn't allergic to anything, they asked if I was doing the deed regularly. I wasn't, but didn't see how that was relevant to my burned hand. She then moved on to my current medications. I was on an asthma inhaler, ADD meds, and birth control. She looked up at me with a smug grin and said, "Alright, well if you aren't doing the deed with anyone, why are you on birth control?" As if she had caught me. I yelled back in her face while clutching my blistered hand, "In case the mood strikes me. Now, if that part of my life is out of the way, can you fix my hand?" Women are on birth control for a lot of reasons. My ex was a virgin and took it because it relieved her cripplingly painful periods. Some women get irregular periods. That nurse is a C-word. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My doctor is also my best friend, and I routinely have to get surgery because of a medical problem. Once when he was cutting into somewhere that I couldn't see, he said, "Oops." I was dating a girl for a while, and we both went to the doctor to get tested for transmitted diseases. When she was done, the doctor grabs me and brings me into the room. We chatted for a bit, and he says, "You know, I probably wouldn't date that girl if I were you. When I was in the army, I was dating a girl. One day she calls me and tells me she had chlamydia. My tests came back negative. I was on the phone with the Navy doctor and he said, 'You know what this means, right?' Yeah? Your girlfriend that you were in a monogamous relationship with had a disease and you didn't." Yeah, I get that.
Let me rephrase. She got it from somewhere that wasn't you.
I got it. I'll deal with it. I mean, that's inappropriate, but looking out. Folks out there fall for the old, I caught it from a public toilet or a bus seat all the time.
I mean, I don't know how I feel about that. In my mind, it might not transgress boundaries by saying, your partner has evidently got this from someone that wasn't you, but telling them to break up is outside their jurisdiction. It's not cancer, you don't need to get this checked out. I got it checked out. It was cancer.
A psychiatrist told me that he didn't have time for my craziness.
After lying to me for weeks, telling me that I was on the waiting list for therapy when I wasn't, I found out when I went to the psychology department that I'd been discharged without a letter to me or my GP. Next time I saw my psychiatrist, he asked me how it made me feel. I told him that it felt like no one cared and just wanted to do me off and tell me what I wanted to hear rather than check to see if what they were saying was even true. The psychiatrist said to me,
"That's just your depression making you feel that way."
"No, you butthole, it's 7 weeks of you telling me I'm on a list and saying you've been checking it yourself when clearly you hadn't. Anyone would feel fobbed off." I was booked to discuss possible knee surgery with a specialist, after several years of physio and many MRIs showed an old injury is not improving. So after a long wait where literally 30 or more people who entered the waiting room after me get seen before I do, I got in the room and the first thing he tells me is that he saw I was next and then deliberately delayed my appointment by 4 hours because other patients were easier to sort out. That's what he actually said. So I was already teed off, he genuinely thought I should be okay with an extra 4-hour wait and no apology at all. Then he can't remember which knee is the issue. I told him and he glanced at the scan and said, "Well, I understand women sometimes feel much more pain than men, but this is probably healed now anyway." Healed. Despite causing issues for 7 years, it's now probably healed. He asks if the pain impacts my life. I listed all the hobbies I've given up, the trips that have been ruined, the flat shoes I had to wear as a bridesmaid because I couldn't walk in heels without crying, and he nods along. So I ask him if I need to take my shoes off for the exam, and he says that's not necessary. He had seen my notes and doesn't think my knee has any problems because if it did, I'd need a wheelchair. Excuse me? I was in that room less than 3 minutes. He didn't look at my leg. He told me if it still hurt to go up and down stairs and collapsed when I tried to do squats in a year, he'd have another look. I rang my doctor immediately. I was furious. She looked over my notes. He wrote that the patient is fully healed and the injury does not affect her in any way. He actually wrote that on my medical records next to a week-old MRI showing 3 massive tears in my tendons and abrasions on the bone. Yeah, magically healed. My doctor wanted me to go back. I've told her I will never speak to that man again and we're figuring out what to do now. One of the doctors in military recruitment post, military service in Russia is mandatory by the way, that's important, looked at me and said something like, "Okay, you're fine," and writes down in my file that I'm healthy. I'm like, "Excuse me, ma'am? I recall having pretty visible scoliosis for my entire freaking life. You might want to consider checking my previous check record from 2 years ago in the same freaking file you're holding." To which he replies, "Oh, well, it seems to be gone now. This is usual when teenagers grow up. Russian recruitment posts are truly miraculous places. Hundreds of thousands of diseases were cured there in just 1 or 2 health checks. Don't worry, eventually it will curve enough that it will go straight again." I just turned 15 and was getting a throat swab. The male doctor noticed that I'd lost my gag reflex and told me not to worry because it would come in handy for certain adult activities. I looked confused, so he repeated himself with more of an emphasis on adult. No, I wasn't confused about what you were implying, you idiot. I was confused about what made you think it was a good idea to say it. I'd known the doctor for years and he'd never said or done anything creepy before or since, so I let it slide. Saw a doctor to discuss a bout of depression I was going through a few years ago, and his diagnostic was, "Well, obviously it's got a lot to do with your face." Yeah, I've got some bad acne scarring, but what a crappy thing to say. Yep, that's one heck of an opening statement. I'm not sure anyone likes to begin a conversation being told they're ugly. Is there any other way to interpret it, or am I missing something? When I was a young teenager, I had a lot of problems with ovarian cysts and had several surgeries to remove them. I woke one night with severe pain and was taken to the ER, where an unfamiliar doctor performed an ultrasound to see what was going on. He was gruff and cold towards me. I was understandably nervous and afraid and feeling vulnerable when he jabbed down on my abdomen with the ultrasound device and remarked loudly, "And here we see the scars from getting your child removed at the clinic." in a very judgmental tone. I'd never had that procedure, and I was just in shock and sort of laid there, silently crying, too afraid to say anything. I wish I could have had the guts to say something at the time. To think that this man was dealing with vulnerable, scared young women, the mistakes he must have made, and the things he must have said to other girls, just sort of breaks my heart. What kind of doctor thinks that procedure leaves scars on the lower abdomen? I wish you could have kicked him in the throat, partially for being a jerk, and partially for being incompetent. I'm not sure. I was a frightened kid in a lot of pain, and it was more his condemning tone that rattled me. This was more than 20 years ago, and I still think about all the things I should have said. When telling him one of my symptoms was that I couldn't do number 2, he said, "Oh, people all over the world get constipated." I had a bowel obstruction. My friend has always been paranoid about getting diabetes since both of her parents have it. She's rail thin, never had an overweight day in her life, and does long-distance running, karate, and yoga. One night, she realized she was seeing halos around any light she looked at. She asked her doctor to check for diabetes, and he laughed and said she was too thin to get diabetes. She said it ran in her family, and he said that it didn't matter, she wasn't fat, so she didn't have it. Her symptoms didn't go away, so she finally went to the hospital and demanded a blood test. She had freaking diabetes. If she wasn't so aware of the disease, who knows how far it would have progressed before her idiot doctor finally tested her. An ambulance took me to the ER of the local hospital after I was snuck up on and beaten about 30 to 40 times by my now ex-wife with a steel rod. The back end of a Colt gun, to be specific. The doctor who examined me in the ER was a very small, older Filipino woman who barely looked at my injuries and was more interested in telling me that I had no reason to be there. "You're a big, strong man. Why you not stop her? Why you not run away? You're fine, lady no hurt man." When the forensic nurse came in to take the photos for the police report, the doctor shooed her away. "He doesn't need you. He's fine. He's fine." She refused to take x-rays or do a CT scan. I was hit in the head a few times and sent me home with no medication or follow-up instructions. I found out later when I got myself to a real doctor that she broke the law by not allowing the forensic nurse to do her job, and that I should have had x-rays and a CT scan because I had 3 broken ribs, a separated shoulder, and a skull fracture that caused some brain injuries. As far as I know, she got no reprimand or punishment for it, and the judge allowed my ex-wife to plea bargain down to offensive touching because of the lack of forensic evidence. Just the other day, I was getting my 20-week scan and the doctor said, "Looks like baby has a cute dinky little nose, unlike his mom's schnoz." It's not so bad, but I'm a little conscious about my big nose, so I thought that was rude. But I'm glad the baby doesn't have my nose. Another time I was in hospital for a miscarriage, and a nurse had to clean up the blood and she loudly said she'd rather be in the nursery than doing this. That was heartbreaking because me too, B-word. My GP had a weekly checkup with my father for years due to him having heart issues. Simple assessment to see if everything was stable. He saw him every single week. He saw him losing about 10 kilos, 24 pounds, as well. Never advised a single extra thing and said he was fine. That was until we forced my father to go to the hospital for a detailed checkup. But the GP says I'm fine, where he passed away a week later. He was in the terminal phase of lung cancer. A fricking lung cancer that had been eating away at him for months, yet the GP didn't even bother noticing anything. I still can't believe this. I went to get checked for transmissibles after I was a victim of the unspeakable act. She was asking me about the experience, if I knew the person, and if anyone else was home. Yes, it was a family member, and one person was asleep upstairs. She asked me why I didn't scream to wake up the person, with a matter-of-fact look on her face. "Yeah, you're right, I should have done that. Stupid me for letting it happen. B-word. I never went back there." I was refused birth control once because apparently it's a decision my husband needed to be present for because we could want kids. Nothing permanent, just birth control. Jesus. 2 occasions, same moron doctor. I was like 12 and I got a skin infection in my back and he just blatantly told me that it was that disease where fish have to eat the dead skin and that it had no cure and it was going to get a lot worse. Being a kid, I was heartbroken by that, especially when told in such a blunt way. Anyways, my mum took me to another hospital and they were shocked at how dumb the other guy was. Obviously wrong diagnosis, it was something really easy to treat, and how he could just blurt that out to a kid. What's the pettiest thing a parent has complained about to their kid's school? For silly fun at the end of the term, I showed an episode of Mr. Bean. He was washing his clothes and pulled out a dress accidentally and put it on. That is what the parents were mad at, that I was encouraging cross-dressing. They were seniors in high school, by the way.
They were seniors in high school, and now they're an all-cross-dressing, traveling cabaret.
And that's your doing, you wonderfully corrupt show business pixie. In my college gender studies class, the first big paper could be skipped if you cross-dressed for a day. I only know 1 or 2 people who chose to actually write the paper. My brother is a high school teacher. He had one kid that was early accepted into college of his choice and decided that his entire senior year could be the frick you all year. My brother had multiple conversations with the parents throughout the year about the fact that the student was failing, as did other teachers. Parents seemed very unconcerned by this. The day before classes ended, my brother runs into the father out in public, and the father says to him, "I'm very concerned about the students, really. I think his school performance this year doesn't bode well for how he's going to do in college." My brother said, "Your son isn't going to college. He has to repeat at least 5 classes this year in order to get his diploma." "What? No, he's already accepted." "Yes, but that's all conditional. Without his high school diploma, which we've been telling you all year he's not going to get, he can't get in." The father, who has a college degree himself, was apparently shocked by this news, and then promptly went right to the school board trying to get his entire senior year waived because he was obviously such a strong student that a school accepted him on early admission. The school board did not agree. The counselors at my school have this big meeting for all the seniors after the typical early admissions date, where they tell horror stories of people getting rescinded. It works pretty well. Parents once complained that I let my 7th grade intermediate ESL students read a story that was a whole 22 pages long, with images for their book report. They had more than a month to read it. It was an edited copy for their level.
How could you monster? 22 pages is too much for any child.
Honestly, even as someone who speaks their second language on a daily basis, the idea of reading a 22-page book is kind of daunting to me, even if I could do it in, a day or so. But I am a dummy, and it's probably good for an official curriculum for these kids. I hate parents that prevent their kids from testing their limits. The first year living in the US, I had a social studies final assignment on the Civil War. It was a total of about 20 essays, each about a page long, double-spaced. Not extremely difficult for your average student, but it seemed impossible to me and other kids in my ESL class. I'd taken English classes before moving to the US, but I would compare it to an English speaker taking Spanish 1. You can say hi and ask for a bathroom, but you can't really have a conversation with anyone. I was the only kid from my ESL class that managed to turn in the entire assignment. Both my ESL and social studies teachers were impressed. I'm sure it was crap, but I felt so proud to have completed it. Most of the other kids in my class took advantage of the circumstances and turned in 2 or 3 pages max, since the teacher had said to turn in what we could because she understood we were in ESL. I witnessed a parent complaining at the end of a primary school concert that it wasn't fair that their child had no discernible musical talent and that the school should stop giving instrument lessons to kids who were keen or talented. I've never seen the music teacher genuinely speechless for so long.
My special snowflake can't play a triangle, so nobody gets to play a triangle.
She was angry that her child got lice in elementary school. Apparently, it was all my fault that her child got infected. After they got the lice out, the mum was adamant that her daughter not be hugged by anyone, or that she shouldn't get too close, but also never specified what too close actually was for me to attempt to enforce. All this so that she didn't get infected again. This is first grade. Trying to keep kids away from each other is like herding cats. This same parent complained to me that I was calling her child by a shortened version of her name, that the child asked me to use. These are just from this year. My kids all got lice in elementary school last year, and I still didn't blame anyone. I just muttered while combing out their hair for like the billionth time. I hate lice. I have my students wash their hands before lunch. Apparently, I'm being unrealistic with my expectations. Get effed, Dawn. Back when I used to teach, I had a parent once complain that my classroom was too quiet, and as a consequence her daughter and her peers got too much work done, and they felt it was bad for their daughter's brain to be learning so much so quickly. Even worse, I had to sit in a meeting between them and my head of faculty to discuss it. Multiple times, my head of faculty had to clarify that they were actually complaining that their daughter was being taught too well. I bet it just made the parents insecure that their kid might be smarter than them. A parent called to complain that I hadn't put her daughter's late homework into the gradebook yet. I told her, I can't put the homework in the gradebook until she actually turns it in. This parent just kept asking me why I hadn't put it in. I kept replying with, I have nothing to put in, she hasn't given it to me. Finally, the call ended with, ugh, some people just don't know how to do their jobs. For everyone saying I should just put in a 0, I would have if I'd been allowed to. The school didn't allow teachers to put zeros in for assignments until the end of semester. So instead, I called parents every time there was an incomplete assignment and reminded them that it would become a 0 in a few weeks. Occasionally, I would put in a 0 for a few days to scare a kid into getting an assignment done, but only if I knew that it would work. My cousin, who teaches kindergarten, had a parent complain to the principal that she was irresponsible for being selfish enough to have a baby and take maternity leave before the end of the school year. Most of my colleagues who are mothers have heard a version of this. Last year, a parent complained that I was missing school too much, and it was negatively affecting her child's learning. My mom spent a month in the hospital and died. I missed 8 days. I had a girl in an honors class. She earned a B+. The mother asked if she could be bumped up. Cases where it's pretty darn close to an A, I'll consider it, but she was at the low end of a B+. During the semester, she changed classes and is now in the same class with a different teacher. She didn't ask to be transferred, but that's just how her schedule happened to work out. I got an email 2 months later from the parent telling me how much better the review packets are that the other teacher gives, and how the other teacher spreads apart the test dates to be more comfortable for the students, and that the student was doing much better in the other class. She asked again if I could change the grades to an A. Those would be valid criticisms if it were not for the fact that I gave the exact same reviews as the other teacher and we scheduled tests on the exact same day. On top of that, I asked what the student currently had in that class. Oh, B+. Oh my god, she tried negging you. I wonder if she thought because she herself was vain enough for it to work on her that it would work on you. Gosh darn, focus all your vitriol on your kids if you want them to pass, parents. Or maybe it's a good thing that all this toxic stupidity isn't directed at their offspring 24/7. My mother's a high school teacher, and this is one of her stories. The kid turns 18 and joins the military. The mother goes ballistic, storms into the school, yelling at everyone, well, just the staff, saying that this was all the school's fault, that he was corrupted into joining and things like that. Demands to talk to the kid's teacher, my mum, and my mum says, "This seems like a talk you should be having with your kid, not me." The lady goes ballistic again. Mum has to call the AP to escort her out of the building. After hearing that, no wonder the kid wanted to join right after high school. One of my students was the child of a co-worker. Both were huge pains in the butt. Co-worker's mother stormed into the class after school to complain that her son had earned a C+ or a B-, I can't remember, on a homework assignment the week before. She was upset that I hadn't contacted her. I explained that I always immediately entered grades into a system that parents had access to online. Parents could view grades and that school calendar, etc. The school employee who maintained the site? It was her. So she knew how to use it. The co-worker's mother demanded that I contact her personally whenever her son made less than an A, and got upset when I said that I wouldn't. I told her I didn't have the time, I had the work of 2 teachers. An email wouldn't take long for me to send, but I didn't want to give myself yet another thing to remember, then risk getting chewed out for forgetting, and risk all of the other parents wanting the same useless courtesy. I said I'd contact her if I noticed a trend of slipping grades, which wasn't the issue with her son. His grades were great overall. This teed her off no end. I said that accessing the site took the same number of clicks it'd take to access an email about the grades, so there was no point. She cried, yelled, and kept pushing and threatened to take this to the principal, who was her best friend. I finally said that if I could keep track of all the grades for the 3 grade levels I taught, surely she could handle keeping track of grades for one kid. Just one incident of many with my beady-eyed witch of a co-worker. This reminds me of a parent I had to deal with just recently. Her son is a good kid, but not a good student. His grades are terrible. His mother emailed me saying that he isn't responsible and asked me to email her the agenda and homework personally every day. Luckily, I have a class website, which they were told about, and upload the agenda, homework, and handouts daily, and just referred her to the site. I still can't understand how she thought that was a reasonable request. I guess that's easier than having a conversation with her kid and helping him become responsible. The bottom of a T. She wanted me to force her daughter to write the letter T as it appears in typing. She scheduled a parent-teacher meeting about it. Did you follow her instructions to a T? No, I told my boss that I'm not a calligraphy teacher and I didn't attend the meeting. The situation seems to have resolved itself. The color of red pen I use. Apparently it's too dark of a red to be considered red, and if I can't do my job properly using the correct red, I'm unqualified to teach. A dark red pen? I can't believe that people like you are allowed around our children. What if the children see it and confuse it for blood and grow up to become vampires? Ted Bundy only killed people because he couldn't get over the fact that his grade 4 teacher used too dark of a red pen. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. A parent complained to a teacher when their child fell on the playground and the clothes got muddy and scratched up. They wanted the school to pay for new clothing. They fell on the pavement which had mud on it since it had rained the day before. The child also didn't hurt themselves, they just got the clothing dirty and scratched a bit when he fell. I had a screaming parent in my office because of a marginal comment I made on an essay that had received a grade of 95%, submitted by a student who was top of the class. The comment said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "This argument is unworthy of you. Don't be lazy. Find better sources and don't hang your argument on idle assertions." The parent claimed I had called her daughter lazy, idle, fat, mentally ill, and unworthy of being a student at my institution. She actually thought I was threatening to have her expelled or at least barred from grad school. The best part? The girl was a second-year undergraduate. The next best part? It was an open office and my colleagues were openly mocking her the entire time. I just sat there and said nothing. I miss those guys. Just to be clear, because of potential pronoun confusion, the female student had no problem with the comment and was absolutely mortified by what her mother had done and seriously concerned that the interference would damage her academic career. I just laughed and told her I was even more impressed that she'd emerged intelligent and sane from a home environment like that, then asked if she needed any letters of reference. She did, and she got them. Her mother got a vaguely insulting note and a small tray of milk chocolates. It seems infinitely more fun to be a professor or doctor purely in that you have a lot more leeway to be sassy to overbearing would-be authority figures, especially once you have tenure. I did a class secret Santa with my choir. Before they were allowed to draw names, they had to bring back a signed form from the parents promising that they'll actually buy the other child a gift. This is 8th grade. One girl didn't buy a gift. I called the parents twice. Both times, a mother told me in a worried voice that didn't inspire confidence that yes, of course she'd get a gift. She never did, so one kid in class who signed up never got a gift. Her mother went absolutely ballistic. Called my principal, insisted we had to make this parent go get her child a gift. I'd already planned to go out and buy her child a gift with my own meager salary, but she told me I wasn't allowed to do so because I had to make this other parent do it. I told her I can't drive to this other parent's house, drag her to the mall, and force her to buy a gift. I simply can't. It's out of my hands. My admin backed me up. She continued to rail at me for another week. I stopped doing Secret Santa after that. My mum was accused of doing witchcraft in the classroom when she told her kids a chant to make a snow day. The chant can only be done if the snow is in the forecast and the students get all of their homework done. The chant is, "Salami, salami, Bologna, let it snow." She just wanted her kids to do their homework. I had a parent complain that her kid was wearing a tight spaghetti strap tank top because the kid got hot and took off her sweater. The mum yelled at me for what she dressed her kid in. Because the conversation went like this. Daughter gets in the car with the parent not wearing the sweater. "You wore that to school? Oh my god, mom, chillax. The teacher said it was fine. You're overreacting." A parent went to the school district over the fact that I wouldn't let her come into my class because she wanted to give her daughter a bracelet that would have completed her outfit. This was back when I taught the 3rd grade. A music student of mine refused to sing one of her lessons in class because she had difficulty reading her bass clef. Her parents came to complain that it's not fair that I'm singling their daughter out because how is she supposed to know this clef? Well, this is her final year in solfege, so... Not replacing the novel the entire 9th grade was assigned with a novel more aligned with her Mormon values. What was the novel in the syllabus and what was her demand? I need closure on this lunacy. The absolutely true diary of a part-time Indian. It has a bit of racy romantic content, which was her main issue. I was teaching 7th and 8th grade at a Catholic school and a group of mums came in and complained that their sons were distracted by my butt and that I needed to do something about it. For the record, my teaching wardrobe is variations of conservative dresses straight out of the 1950s. Most awkward meeting ever. What do you even say to something like that? Yes, I shall deflate my butt in consideration? I basically said that, actually. I refused to push the review test and subsequent lessons after the test back because her parents wanted to take her out of school for a week to go on vacation. This was about 2 weeks after the winter break, mind you. Only have so much time to teach the entirety of World War I. They couldn't wrap their head around it and kept saying that I was trying to make it so their kid failed. My wife teaches at a school that uses Class Dojo. It does a lot of different things, but it is essentially a behavioral management system. She can give kids points for doing the right thing and can take points away if they do the wrong thing. The parents who sign up for notifications get them sent straight to their phone or computer. She had one student this year who was refusing to do work and was being disrespectful to the student teacher. She was basically telling the student teacher that she wasn't really a teacher and that she, the student, didn't have to listen to her, the student teacher. My wife overheard what was going on and took away a point for disrespect. The girl's parents came in the next day and the dad was demanding that my wife change the disrespectful point. He didn't mind that his daughter lost a point, but he was teed off that she lost a point for being disrespectful. He told her that a 7-year-old isn't capable of disrespect and insisted that this was going to ruin her chances of getting into Stanford because they would see her as a disrespectful person. My wife explained that this information is simply a way to track behavior and communicate with the parents. It has nothing to do with a permanent record, it's just an app. The dad continued to demand that it be changed and my wife eventually relented. She changed it to a refusal to work point instead. I'm not sure if Stanford thinks being lazy is better than being disrespectful, but the dad seemed to think so. My mother forced me to go to my 6th grade social studies teacher and ask her why I'd missed half a point on a 16-point assignment. That's 97%. I assume your mother's logic went something like this: failed life must achieve through children. I had a parent try to excuse her son's lack of homework completion as too hard for little boys. It was identifying nouns in a Year 9 class. At my old school, a parent complained to the principal that her child's punishment was too severe because when he exposed himself in class, it was just the berries and not the twig. That I gave their child a detention for saying something foul in Spanish. I guess they just didn't like this gringo calling their child out for the stuff they were saying. Admins caved to the parents and I was less than amused. Not a teacher, but I recall that my daughter's 2nd grade teacher got in trouble with another parent during the Iraq War by referring to Saddam Hussein in class as Saddam Insane. That parent was anti-Bush and anti-war and assumed that the teacher was some kind of right-wing Republican. I'm not sure of the teacher's politics, but he was an African-American gay man. The controversy blew over pretty quickly. This was in San Francisco, so yeah. Not a parent, but a college student. She told me she deserves to get rounded up to an A. Now, she had a lot of absences, never participated in class discussions, and didn't improve at all over the course of the semester. Oh, and she also had an 84, 5 points away from rounding range. When she wasn't rounded up, she sent an email saying that she didn't care about the class. She cares about getting into medical school, a dream that I've now ruined. She signed the email, "Your grace will be rewarded. Karma." When I was in middle school, I got something like 8 or 9 hours of detention for some stupid thing I did. My mum kept telling the teacher that it was not enough and that he should increase my detention time for 1 whole month, that I know of. I still pity my teacher. I dread awards day as an elementary school teacher. I had a parent complain that their child didn't get an academic award. I made sure that every child got something, whether it be for an academic subject like reading, writing, math, social studies, or science, or just for their awesome personality. I can't remember what her child got, but it was one of those personality awards. He was a very cheerful, sweet kid, but she said that this award sent the message that academics weren't important or that he wasn't smart. With over 120 kids in that grade level, it was impossible to give everyone an academic award. He had a chance to win one. If he read a certain amount of books, you would win a reading award. But you actually had to keep track of that at home and turn the paper back into me, which he didn't. So I'll just say that this wasn't the first time she'd complained about something petty that year. I once had a parent accuse me and the admins of a conspiracy against her daughter. I had her in my class period and she always skipped, so I always marked her absent. She couldn't believe that her precious snowflake could be skipping. A parent from a rival school once complained to my teacher that I was too big to be playing 6th grade basketball. Must have been held back a few years, were her exact words. Joke's on her though, the teacher was my mum and promptly informed her that I was the youngest kid in my class by several months. I just had a tall father and a very early series of growth spurts. I got chewed out for expecting a 12-year-old to be able to read an analog clock. What's the scariest thing you've seen that no one believes you about? It would help if I had pictures to explain the setting here, but I used to fish at an abandoned house's pond near my home. Next to that property was a wealthy neighborhood of about 6 houses, mansions. One day, while getting off the bus, I saw a black Mercedes with fully tinted windows, which is rare in New Jersey, sitting in the driveway of the pond house. I found it odd and was kind of sad because I thought I'd never get to fish there again. The next day, I found out the man who lived at the end of the wealthy neighborhood had been shot in the head while he slept. Rumor has it he was involved in the mafia. I believe those rumors. I was sleeping at my cousin's house on New Year's Eve 2014. My 3 cousins, brother and I all decided to sleep in the same bedroom as our parents were staying out all night. We were old enough to stay at home on our own. The point is, we were 100% the only people in the house that night and all slept in the same place. Woke up the next day and was getting in the car to leave when I had to look at my camera roll from the previous night. To my absolute horror, there were 5 photos of us all sleeping. Every single person was in the photos fast asleep, so there was no way any of us took those pictures. My aunt showed the photos to the landlord and he had no explanation. To this day, nobody knows who took them. Oh boy, this is a scary one. Do you think it was the landlord? I'm assuming he'd have the key. Maybe he'd have known the adults were away for the night. Yeah, not hard. Most phones allow you to use the camera without unlocking it. And if he left his phone on a table or something, then easy enough to use it. Right after high school, class of 91, I got a contract job with the Forest Service. We traveled all over the West doing gopher control in replanted clear-cuts. The gophers would eat the tender roots of the newly planted saplings, and we had to control them to give the trees a chance to get started. We were returning to our hometown after a long job in Oregon, driving across the desert near a government lab. It's about 3 a.m. and we're going at about 80 in a 55-mile-per-hour zone. Suddenly, a semi-truck, completely blacked out, no lights at all, bombs past us on this stretch of highway like we were standing still. Then, 2 army-style trucks also blacked out. Scared the crap out of us. We got back to our hometown and told several people what we saw, and no one would believe us. I still think they were doing freaky crap out there in that desert lab. If we'd tried to chase them or anything, we probably would have disappeared. In short, freaky blacked-out government trucks from a secret lab blew past us in the dark. I've never even heard of something like that, but that's just the thing. You wouldn't hear about something like that. You got a fleeting glimpse at something very secret there. My uncle used to live in Nevada near an Air Force base, and he saw stuff like this all the time. He said the scariest one was a blacked-out semi his hopped-up muscle car couldn't keep up with. Crazy stuff out there. No telling what goes on. My dad had top-secret clearance in the Air Force base and still clams up and gets weird about UFO stuff and secret tech. See, I'm not a big believer that there are aliens being hidden in Area 51 or anything, but stuff like this is absolutely riveting. What's being developed and being shipped around under the cover of darkness in these definitely not Secret Service mobiles? When I was little, 7 or 8, I woke up one night to a white dog sitting in the doorway of my bedroom. That was weird because we didn't have a dog or any other indoor pets. While I watched, it got up and went down the hall towards the living room. I got up, looked down the dark, empty hall, and went the opposite direction to my parents' room. I woke my mum up and told her there was a dog in the house. She got up and we looked, but didn't find anything. She thought I was dreaming. At some point when I was older, I found a picture of the dog my parents had when I was a baby. I learned from my mum that the dog often slept in the doorway guarding my room. But the dog died before I was 2. The dog in the picture was the dog I saw that night. In college, I had a summer internship in a national park that had just ended a wolf reintroduction program. A number of interns were housed in an area of cabins clustered together on a 1-lane gravel road. I was staying in a different area of the park and had gone over to the cabins for dinner one night. I left pretty late, close to midnight, and was enjoying the quiet walk down the road to my car. It was a clear night with a full moon, and the conifers growing on either side of the road shaded it almost entirely. As I'm walking, I see a light-colored shape on the other side of the road coming in my direction. I kept walking slowly, and as we drew towards each other, I saw that it was an enormous canid of some sort. Far too big to be a coyote, but as far as we know, all the wolves had been relocated. We each kept our pace, and it never turned its head or anything, just kept walking. I somehow managed not to pee myself, but by the time I got into my car, I was shaking so hard that I could barely get my key in the ignition. Everyone I've told thinks I was exaggerating, but I was stone-cold sober, less than 10 feet from it, and that animal's back was up to my waist, easily the biggest dog creature I've ever seen. To clarify, I did see it clearly in the moonlight when it was close. It had the coloring and general characteristics, like a narrow head, snout shape and ears, of a light-phase coyote, but the bulk and size of a wolf. Larger than any Great Pyrenees I've ever seen. Looking back, it was definitely a benign encounter, just 2 folks out for a stroll, passing each other on the street. Was this by any chance at Yellowstone? Only asking because I visited there several years ago, and we became friendly with a waiter in a restaurant who told us about the huge wolf that they have that wanders the park. He said he saw it once and it was nearly twice the size of a regular wolf. He also said it wasn't aggressive or anything, just looked at him for a bit before walking away. I'm not sure about any relocation programs in Yellowstone, but it sounds like it might be the same wolf. Doing a service call on an apartment, and this lady has an obvious obsession with dolls, like those 15-inch tall pioneer-looking dolls. She's not home, so I go about my business, very uncomfortable, and even more so when I enter her bedroom. She literally has more than 300 dolls with doll heads tied to strings from the ceilings, and a small little altar-like thing in the corner of her bedroom, with a severed chicken head, and gargoyle-like statues and pictures of children. There's a pig's hoof hanging from a red cord in her bathroom. When I got to the dining room, there's a Ouija board and multiple dolls all arranged around a dismembered doll that's drenched in what I think was blood. I think I broke the human top speed record that day, and nobody believes me about it. It was probably voodoo, and Wazir had performed a blessing for the children in the photo. Spend some time in Haiti, and the old woman would do this with photos of people they cared about. The goats and chickens throw most people off, but it was probably a caring grandma just doing her ritual to make sure the kids were safe today. Maybe that isn't what's going on, but I'd just tell myself that. For my own sake of being able to sleep tonight, I'm going to assume that all the stuff was fake and she was messing with you. One day I walked into my leather couch ripped open. I lived alone. My mum and I were driving through rural Missouri late one night. It was dark and hard to see much beyond the headlights. All of a sudden, something scampered across the road in front of our car. We didn't hit it, but when it got to the other side of the road, on the shoulder, it sat up on its hind legs, turned around and looked directly at us. It had a long, thin tail, too thin to be a foxtail, too big in general to be a squirrel or possum. To this day, we both swear it was a monkey. People don't believe us, but the way it turned back and looked at us once it got to the other side of the road was so chilling and human-like. Based on the size, shape, and movement, it could only be some sort of primate. My mum used to yell at me to close the pantry door, and one day when I was home alone, I got a snack and left the door open. As I was walking away, the door slammed shut and I heard a voice say, "Close it." Quietly but intensely. I swear I literally grabbed my dog and ran faster than I've ever run before up to my room and locked the door. Let's just say I literally will never forget to shut that damn door again. Can you imagine being so slovenly that even the ghosts in your building start telling you to get your crap together? Talk about a wake-up call, man. I once walked into my living room to see a football that I've never seen before lying in the middle of the room vertically. It fell on one side where I guess it noticed me and proceeded to roll into the kitchen behind the counter and out of view. After standing there from awe and confusion, I went to look for it and it wasn't there. Never saw that again. In high school, I briefly dated a gothy chick whose idea of a good time was to hang out and occasionally make out in the old graveyard at the edge of town. Not my favorite thing in the world, but she was cute and I was 16, so there you have it. One night she told me to meet her there. The place was dark and empty as always. I had my phone flashlight and was poking my way through the headstones to the tree that was our usual meetup spot, when I saw some movement in my peripheral vision. Turned the light to where I thought it was in time to see a silhouette move behind a headstone about 30 yards away. I was sure it was her trying to scare me, which sometimes she did, and I called out to her, and in response I heard a female voice, but not hers, call the same name back to me, like it was mocking me. I turned and sprinted back to the road. I texted her from my car. She said she hadn't left her house yet. I cancelled on her and drove home. In my hometown, in Massachusetts, there's a colonial-era graveyard where I used to enjoy walking at night. I saw an odd-shaped gravestone that I didn't remember seeing before, much lighter color than the others, and as I got closer, it seemed to be moving. I was really intrigued. Got closer, and it was two people screwing. Oops, wasn't even that late. My friends and I used to frequently visit the abandoned Joseph P. Ladd School. It was rumored to be haunted. Most of the time I just assumed the noises were other people on the property. I'd never experienced anything supernatural there, just, scared because of the circumstances of what could happen. One of the last times I was there, I brought my crowbar because the state had started boarding and welding doors shut. So here I am trying to pry open a small enough gap between these two doors. There was a good 6-inch space between them where it was open. After a few tries, I'm getting pretty aggravated, saying to myself, is this freaking worth it? It was pretty well late night and the moon was really bright, so I didn't need my flashlight unless I was inside a building. Also, I didn't use it because of the risk of alerting security. So I'm peering through these two doors down this hall with my flashlight, and about 50 feet down the hallway, it looked like some light dust came into view. So the dust entered where my flashlight was aimed, and then suddenly, it turned. I could see the cloudy, barely visible outline of a chest, shoulders, and head. Nothing else. As it turned, I can still vividly remember what appeared to be the ghostly, misty outline of shoulders and a head moving towards the flashlight. So, as any person would, I ran away and screamed. Never have I been so scared in my life. New England is the best when it comes to spooky legends. Rhode Island has more legends than it does square feet. Lovecraft's quote sums it up perfectly. Searchers after horror haunt strange far places. For them are the catacombs of Ptolemies and the carven mausolea of the nightmare countries. They climb to the moonlight towers of ruined Rhine castles and falter down black cobwebbed steps beneath the scattered stones of forgotten cities in Asia. The haunted wood and the desolate mountain are their shrines, and they linger around the sinister monoliths on uninhabited islands. But the true epicure and the terrible, to whom a new thrill of unutterable ghastliness is the chief end and justification of existence, esteems most of all the ancient, lonely farmhouses of backwoods New England. For there the dark elements of strength, solitude, grotesqueness, and ignorance combine to form the perfection of the hideous. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Was with a bunch of kids playing around the street when I noticed a floating stick. There's no trees around and everyone else saw it. Put my hands around it to make sure it wasn't a spider's web or a string, but it was definitely floating. The moment I touched it, it fell. Still can't explain it to this day. I was driving to South Dakota to visit family and I drove all night. Around 7 a.m., tired, almost 45 minutes to my destination, I looked east from the highway and deep in the plains there was this huge golden bridge silhouetted structure. Mended with the clouds and the sparkle of the sun, it almost looked like heaven. I mean, it looked small from the car, but I understand depth perception, and up close that would be a huge Golden Gate-sized structure. Looks like it stretched from north to south as far as I could see. Rubbed my eyes? Still there. I just remembered thinking, I'm tired as heck. I've driven this road many times and there isn't anything this way except grassy plains. Fast forward maybe a year or two, I'm back in South Dakota working for the summer with my family. One day for work we had to drive down the same road about 8 a.m.-ish when one of the guys goes, I remember this one morning, we were driving down the same road for work and this golden bridge-looking thing, huge as frick, was on the horizon over there, pointing to the east where I saw it years earlier. All of a sudden, instantly when he said that, I remembered that moment from years earlier. I remembered it because I thought I was hallucinating, but they described exactly what I saw. This is South Dakota, and there isn't a huge golden bridge-looking object anywhere in the state. It still baffles me to this day. I try not to think too much on it because I haven't seen it since. Weird as heck though. Every time I visit my family, I look to the east on that same stretch of road, but I haven't seen it again. My buddy and brother's evidence of seeing it only validated that I wasn't crazy and that they saw the same thing. I was about 4 to 6 years old and my mother was telling me to get ready for bed. I remember hopping on the bed and going straight for the window. I pulled open the curtains dramatically. I was face to face with a giant fly or moth head. Its face was staring straight at me and was huge, almost like a mask pulled over someone's head. I became hysterical trying to express what I saw and was told it was in my imagination. Now, this was in the window to the backyard. Our house was on a foundation above ground, so that window was about 10 feet off the ground. It's been over 17 years and I remember that creature staring back and the sheer horror of its eyes. Can't bring myself to look out the window at night now. My friend, I think you experienced whatever the equivalent of Pennywise was in your area, and you really need to get the heck out of there before he comes back after his long sleep. When I was 17, I was up late one night watching a movie in my living room. I was living in a condo at the time, a smallish building, only 3 stories, so not a lot of people. It was mostly middle-aged people and in the nice end of town, so we rarely heard noise from neighbors, especially late at night. So the movie ends and the credits roll. It's about 2 a.m. I'm playing on my phone and the condo is pretty quiet. Suddenly I hear a noise coming from the front door. It sounded like a long nail or claw slowly dragging across the door, and then a soft tap tap tap. This repeats several times. Meanwhile, I'm crapping myself. It was the most eerie, ominous sound. I felt like I was in a horror movie. I was too scared to look out of the peephole because I thought whatever it was might see my shadow looking out, as lights were on near the door. Who knows what they want? I'm not out here trying to die. The horrible scratching noise carries on for about 30 seconds and then stops. 20 minutes later, I got the guts to go and look in the hallway and nothing was there. And no marks are on the door. I still get the heebie-jeebies thinking about it. When I was 3 or 4 years old, I had a best friend named Abigail. We did everything together. Played in the sandbox, creeks and rivers, playgrounds, you name it, we were sidekicks. I even drew her portrait one day and told my mum to save it somewhere safe so I could give it to her on her birthday. I still have it somewhere, but I drew a girl with dark shoulder-length hair with a red bow in it. She was wearing a blue jumper-like dress with a long-sleeve red shirt under it, and brown shoes. I just remember I loved playing with her, and then one day I just never saw her again. Now, if this were my mum telling the story, she would just say that at this age, I was an independent little girl who liked to play and be by myself. She just thought Abigail was an imaginary friend. Until one day, when I was about 11 or 12 years old, the local historical society posted a researched historical article detailing the events of a tragic farmhouse fire that happened about 75 or 80 years prior on the property that our subdivision was built on. The fire was a devastating one in which a family of 6, 2 parents and 4 kids, were all killed. One of those kids was a 4-year-old and her name was Abigail. A picture of the family was included in the article, black and white, but you could clearly see the little girl had dark shoulder-length hair with a bow in it and was wearing a jumper with a long-sleeve shirt under it. To this day, my mum still refuses to believe my best friend was probably a ghost. My brother-in-law had an imaginary friend when he was very young, and he is absolutely convinced to this day that she's a ghost. He said they'd play together all the time, and even though he had 3 older brothers, he preferred to play with her. He recalls her waking him up in the middle of the night to play football with him in the hallway outside his bedroom, and he would always get up and play even though he knew he would get in trouble for it, because if he didn't, he said she would sit next to the bed and cry. She wore a red dress and little black shoes. He also remembers the last time he played with her. She told him she would have to leave soon and he wouldn't ever see her again. He was devastated and asked her why, and she replied that he was getting too old now. He's a big, super strong, no-nonsense, kind of intimidating guy these days, but when he talks about his little friend, he gets very serious and emotional. It's real to him. I used to live in an old 3-story row house with my father, mother, and older brother. It was fairly typical in that it made some old house sounds and had some areas that never really saw natural light, like the staircase and downstairs hallway. It was a pretty normal place, but in the late 80s, my father self-deleted. Over the course of about a year, we had a multitude of unusual happenings in the house. Most things small, shadows moving and objects not being where you left them, but some things, borderline violent, happened too, like an old lamp exploding and doors slamming shut. I was primarily the person who saw these things happening. That leads me to the biggest incident. I've told my mother, my brother, and some friends, and now my wife, but no one thinks it happened the way I remember it. I was 9 years old. My father had been gone for almost a year. I was sitting on my bed reading when a young man, maybe in his late 20s, looking disheveled and confused, opens my bedroom door. Startled, I shout, "Mom! There's a guy in my room!" He stood there for a second and looked straight ahead. "What do you want?" I asked, and he walked straight through my room and through the wall that connected to the neighbors as if he was immaterial. Immediately next door, I heard a scream of blood-curdling terror from my neighbor. She was screaming and crying loudly, and you could hear physical commotion. I kept shouting for my mum, who came in and comforted my crying and terrified 9-year-old self. I told her what had happened, and she could hear the screaming next door. She went over to the neighbor's house to find out what was going on. The neighbor's husband opened the door. Turns out his wife had just in that moment of screaming found out her brother had self-deleted. Now, I'm nearly 40 and I don't talk about these times very often. I don't know what it was, I don't know if I was crazy. I don't believe in ghosts. Looking back on those times, a lot of things didn't make sense. My family never really saw or experienced things on the same magnitude I did, so I've kind of kept it quiet. A light. I was alone on a forested, snow-covered mountain and there was a bright light just sitting in the middle of the trail. It was there all night. In the morning, there was nothing there. This is one of those horror movies where you're thinking, "Frickin' seriously, dude? You're going to investigate the spooky light? Of course there's a monster there. Don't go over there, you dumb idiot. I'm glad you didn't go check it out and get eaten. But I also want to know what the heck that light was. Perhaps next time, just have a quick look with your binoculars or something and report back to us." Listen, you started off sounding smart, but everyone who's seen a horror movie knows that if you look through binoculars, a monster will jump right up in front of you from nowhere while you're looking and jump scare/disembowel you. A white, smiling face at my window as I was laying down for bed. It was glowing as if it were a light source, and it had no nose that I can remember, just slits like a snake. Eyes had no color, just black pupils. Its mouth was wider than any human's. No hair either. And the height from the ground to my window is about 8 feet, and it was perfectly at eye level. My mother checked all around and there was nothing, but I swear to God I saw it and it was a person. She still teases me about it from time to time. When I was about 7 or 8, my neighbors had walkie-talkies and we would all play with them in the neighborhood and talk. For some reason, I changed my station because I couldn't hear them anymore. Then an older gentlemanly voice comes on and starts talking to me. He was telling me he was my uncle and his daughter was crying and he wanted me to say her name over and over to comfort her. Young me starts doing it and then I stopped because I freaked out. I ran and told my parents what happened and they didn't believe me. I've never touched one since because I know it was some perv getting off on it. I saw a UFO with my mother in Oregon one night. We were traveling when I spotted a triangle shape in the sky, formed by 5 bright lights. We stopped the car, got out and looked, and it's just hovering there, silently with no movement. I should have taken pictures or a video, but I was so caught up in the moment because I couldn't make out what I was seeing. Out of nowhere, this thing shot off into the horizon, faster than any man-made machine. We both remember clear as day, however very few people believe our story. What's the worst case of spoiled rotten that you've seen? My roommate is an application essay reader for a university's business school. He was just telling me about a kid who wrote his overcoming hardship essay about how he really wanted a boat because all of his friends had boats and it was hard for him to be left out. Then he overcame his hardship when his parents bought a boat. I guess his hardship wasn't a hard ship to get. Was at the Ford dealership getting my oil changed and killing time by walking through the big showroom. There's a Mustang GT350 sitting in the middle with a huge bow on it and folks gathered around waiting for someone. Minutes later, the family comes in with their son who immediately yells about wanting it in blue instead of black and denting the passenger door with a swift kick. The parents didn't even have money. He wanted new clothes and was told no, so he put his clothes in the bathtub and poured bleach on them. The parents brought him new clothes. Holy crap, that would have been a bleachy clothes-wearing dude if it was my son. Yep, the only way to get kids to realize that being a craphead isn't going to benefit them is to let them do it and deal with the consequences. Eventually, they'll learn that being a jackass doesn't pay off. In high school, 1987, this really pretty girl was about to turn 16 and her parents got her a fully frame-up, restored 65 Mustang. It wasn't what she wanted, so they got her a new Porsche 944, not the only one at my school. It was customized with rims and upholstery that had her name embroidered on it. When she graduated, they got her a new Lexus sedan. Her father was a preacher at a small rural church. Her mum was a stay-at-home trophy wife. Still have no idea how they pulled that off. I worked at a tax office and I can tell you that religion is a very profitable business. Sister refuses to look for a job and as a result moves back home. She uses my parents' vehicle to drive around with her boyfriend and go to parties and stuff. One day there's a family emergency and the car is not in the driveway for her to use. She throws a tantrum, trashes the house, and runs away with her boyfriend. By the way, my sister is 22 years old. That kinda sounds like the problem solved itself. A girl in my high school had totaled 4 cars by the time she graduated on account of crashing 2, flipping one onto someone else's lawn, and accidentally running someone else's car completely over. I have to be honest, 4 cars in presumably less than 5 years is almost impressive in terms of a person's inability to coordinate or learn from their mistakes, not to mention somehow not getting their license revoked. Okay, I've got one. My boyfriend's little half-sister. So her parents are real hippies. They live at least 40 minutes from the nearest town, which doesn't have much anyway. They live on an eco-friendly hamlet which her parents built from scratch. Since the age of, say, 10, she's now 16, my boyfriend's sister has been a stealer of money. Started off by taking coins when she was babysitting for neighbors, eventually finding out where stashes of cash were kept, and then the neighbors found out and told her parents. They were mortified but didn't do much apart from tell her off and make her promise she wouldn't do it again. Little things like that happened and same outcome. Then her granddad passed away who left a share of $1 million to her mother, which was used to upgrade the farm, buy more land, among other things. She stole money from her dead granddad's wallet in his fricking pocket when he was lying in the house dead when no one was looking. All she got was a bit of a telling off. She never has to give the money back because she spends it first. Her parents just say, work it off by doing chores. Now she's 16 and her latest crimes have been stealing her mum's card to buy $800 of makeup online. Her parents took the makeup from her, hoping to return it, but not before she replaced the makeup in the boxes with old bottles. They let her keep the makeup after this and still let her do all her school camps and parties. The last I'd heard, her parents had started a B&B and made a couple of grand only to have it disappear because she found out their internet banking passwords, transferred it to herself, and then spent it on food, friends, and makeup all in one weekend before they could find out. Her punishment? Work it off by doing chores. It makes me sick. I had to do chores for free. I'm still doing chores for free in my own house. Fricking heck. I was in Toys R Us in the 90s. This mother and her daughter, who had to be around 12, were shopping. The girl asks if she can have some toy. The mother said, "No, we're here to get a gift for…" And the girl asked once or twice more and the mum declined. The girl then said, "F you, mummy," and took off running. The mother chased her, while the kid cussed her out. Eventually, it must have ended. I went to check out and the mother-daughter couple were behind me. The mother not only got the toy she wanted, but actually apologized to the daughter. That was my cousin Zach, but when we left Toys R Us, his dad made him give the toy to Salvation Army. He cried, and I got yelled at for laughing. Okay, this is an opposite case, but it's a great counterpoint. I know a multi-millionaire chick, maybe 95 million in net worth. She's a friend of my ex-wife. We hang out with her on a semi-regular basis. At any rate, one day, years ago, my kid is playing some Game Boy DS shareable game with her sons. It's a game that my kid has. Her boys don't. They finally finish the game while the grown-ups are getting lit and eating way too much crab. One of her boys runs up to his mum and asks, "Can you get this game? It's really fun." She says, "Oh, money's tight. I'll tell you what, put it on your Christmas list. That's only a couple of months away, okay?" "Okay." And with that, all of the kids went downstairs to play whatever on the whatever device. I looked at her and said, "Money's tight?" She related the tale of how the kids have no idea that they have money. It was the way she was raised. She didn't discover the money until she graduated university. At first, she was teed off because her college could have been so much easier with money. But a few months after graduation, she started thinking back on how teed off she had been at the wealthy kids who just bought their way out of every problem that came their way, and how disgusted she had been at the way they lived their lives. She apologized to her dad and swore that she would raise her kids exactly the same way. She lives in a modest little house, and her boys wear sneakers until they destroy them. They will find out when they graduate college. Oh, this is one of my favorite spoiled kid comeuppance stories ever. I had a friend, Don, who had 2 kids, a year apart in age. When his son turned 16, Don was ready to give him his pristine Volkswagen. Don really babied his cars, so this Jetta, though about 7 years old, was truly in like-new condition. A car that most normal 16-year-olds would be thrilled to have. I would have been thrilled to have it myself. So Don tells his son the plan, and his dad goes, "Dad, I'm not driving that car. It's a 7-year-old Jetta. I need a new pickup truck." After taking a deep breath so he didn't throttle his son, Don simply said, "Well then, I'll drive the Jetta for 1 more year and give it to your sister when she's 16. If you want a new pickup truck, then you'll have to either ask your mother or buy one yourself." Now, Don and his kid's mother had been divorced for years, and through a series of bad choices, his ex-wife had barely 2 dimes to rub together. Don had gotten remarried to a woman who was very successful and a wealthy business owner. His son, very mistakenly, thought that Don and his current wife would foot the bill for whatever the son wanted. How very wrong he was. Fast forward a year, and his daughter was very happily driving around the Jetta. Don bought himself a brand new Mazda. His son has access to neither of them. In desperation, he bought himself a crappy $800 beater just to get himself to and from work. Lesson learned, I hope. I applaud Don for sticking to his guns and not teaching his kid to be an entitled butthole at an early age. A friend of mine is married to a very rich man. Old coal money or something. No one in the family has to work because they just live off investments. Anyway, she was crying one day because her mother-in-law was threatening to cut her husband's allowance and he might have to get a job. Cripes, I mean, don't get me wrong, I hate having to do stuff for a living sometimes, but having to do what the rest of the population does to continue your elevated style of living shouldn't be this much of a dream crusher. There are some follow-ons to this comment. I want to know what these people do all day. I can understand not bothering with a 9-to-5 if you're filthy rich, but there are only so many Lamborghinis to crash and so many expensive substances to absorb in one's lifetime. Charity and socializing, I suppose. I know a guy who had a few homes his family owned and he had no wife or kids or siblings. Actually, some of his siblings had died tragically. He's not filthy rich, just comfortable, and has at best to do some repairs and find good tenants. So he doesn't really work. The tragedies killed his drive. He spent all of his time reading and collecting books, and he bought so many off of Amazon that they just keep sending him books for free to review. You know, aside from the tragedies, that sounds peaceful. He has what he wants and probably doesn't need to worry about it. Can't imagine what he'd trade for his siblings back, though. I was on my high school's newspaper staff, and we always did a section on cars in the parking lot, where we highlighted one crappy car and one super nice car, and then interviewed both owners. Everyone loved it, and don't worry, the crappy car owners were always super excited to be a part of it, and they always had the best stories. So we pick Snobette Snootyson because she's got a nice brand new Range Rover or something, and after I'm the last to call not it, I'm forced to interview her. What's your favorite feature of the car? Well, one time I forgot to put it in park and it started rolling away, but it didn't roll that fast, so probably that. Or my G-Easy bumper sticker. Have you got any funny stories about your car? Yeah, when my parents first got it for me, I was making faces at my friend and turned left when it wasn't an arrow and I totaled it, so they got me the same one again. I managed to sneak into the article. Snootyson has managed to keep her car undamaged since October. It was January when I wrote the article. When I turned 16, all I wanted for my birthday was to see the Blue Man Group perform. I saved my own money to pay for the ticket. I gave my mum the money, and I was really excited because my mum said she had the tickets and everything. My mum, my sister, and I all got in the car to go see the show. We arrived at the wrong place, and I immediately thought something was wrong. When I asked my mum why we were there, she said that my sister wanted to see O by Cirque du Soleil, so she just brought the tickets for that instead. I was so blown away that even though it was my birthday and my money, my sister had the final say over what we ended up doing. I refused to see the show and opted to walk through the casino the entire time instead. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'll throw out the disclaimer that the guy wasn't a jerk, he was actually okay, but the stunning privilege was both jaw-dropping and hilarious. A Hispanic guy in college came from a pretty wealthy family. He had never had a job before, which isn't really that crazy for his age and being a student, though I'd been working all throughout college. One day he decided to get a job because he was bored and wanted to see what it was like. I forgot where he got a job at, but it was a pretty laid-back part-time job pushing paper in an office setting. A few weeks after starting, we were hanging out and he's talking about work. He reached into his pocket and says, "Today they gave me this. What am I supposed to do with it?" It was his paycheck. I stared at him for a second and said, "My man, that's your check." "What do you mean, what do I do with it? You deposit it in your bank." He says, "I don't know what to do with that. My dad just puts money in there. I don't look at it, I just take money out from ATMs or use my card." Not wanting to walk the poor idiot through such an easy process, I just tell him to take it to a grocery store and cash it. What he said next made me nearly fall off the couch in disbelief. He said, "What do you mean cash it? Like they'll just give me money for this?" Must be real nice to have that amount of wealth. My employer's two sons have everything paid for, so they never have to worry about cost. They both have everything they want and need. One of them likes expensive shiny things, and he's always thrown fits until he got what he wanted, from what his dad told me. For Christmas, he wanted a $1,200 55-inch Samsung curved TV, even after his dad stated that his budget was $1,000 each. Also, wow, he threw fits and got mad at his dad, and his dad, being the wimp that he is, apologized and ended up buying it for him anyway. The son is 21 years old. When my brother broke off one of the rearview mirrors on my father's nicest car 2 days before getting his license, driving illegally because he couldn't be bothered with the 5-minute walk to the store on a mild sunny day to get a can of soda. And then he just put the car in the garage like nothing happened, and my parents brought him a brand new motorcycle so that he wouldn't be tempted to borrow the car anymore. I may have been worse, but this was in my family, so... When I was 15, I was dating this girl that I met at a coffee shop downtown. Her parents were loaded, like home movie theater wine cellar live-in maid loaded. The girl got a brand new Lexus for her 16th birthday. It took her 4 times to pass her driving test. A week later, she totaled the car, so they bought her another one. Her parents also flew her from California to London to go school clothes shopping. Went to school with a girl who got a 2012 BMW and literally cried and cussed out her parents because she didn't get a 2015. I knew one girl who got a hot pink Hummer for her quinceañera. Since she still had a year before she could drive, she decided to keep the Hummer for no apparent reason and got a Mercedes Roadster once she turned 16. Knew another girl who got a Mercedes G-Wagon for her 16th. She crashed it a week later on purpose because her stepdad bought it as an attempt to buy her love, and she caught him cheating on her mom. Don't know if that's exactly worth it. Recurring theme for the video is rich awful kids spurning more money than some grown hardworking adults have in their accounts just because they have no appreciation for money. So gross. In college, I knew a girl whose daddy was some big-shot banker or something, made enough that the wife didn't have to work and 3 kids could go to expensive schools with little financial aid. This girl didn't have to work during college and had all of her supplies and lodging paid for by daddy, and got to fly home every time there was a 3-day weekend, all on her father's dime. I once had to borrow $10 from her to pay for some food when we went out to eat. I promised I'd pay her back once I got my check next week. At the time, I worked for a cafe, and she seemed cool with it. Turns out she was not cool with it and promptly bashed me on her blog and to all her other friends, calling me a bad person and a thief. Because I borrowed $10, which I'd paid her back, by the way. I brought up the blog posts and she was very embarrassed. Last I heard of her, she's living in daddy-paid Manhattan apartment, working part-time as a receptionist at a yoga studio. She started a new blog about the struggle. Another instance, this was back in high school so the details are a little fuzzy, but there were 2 girls. One, the daughter of oil money, and the other, the daughter of a garbage truck corporation. They always tried to outdo each other. The oil money girl got a brand new Audi convertible when she got her license. Oh god, I knew the worst one. Big shot oil daddy, and she was the most insufferable human I've ever witnessed. Tried to brand herself as this super environmentalist hippie, but used all of her dad's oil money for weekly trips across the country, in private jets, with insane wardrobe and fancy dinners. I've never seen someone use money so frivolously while constantly social media preaching about all the earth has given her or whatever. Seriously, her Instagram posts are hilarious. An undressed picture of herself with her chest blurred out. As I'm soaked in the bright and glorious sun, I'm moved with gratitude. I give thanks for every part of my body for warrioring me through life and for simply being. Thank you, water. You are life. May we protect you as you do for us. For the past week, I've been deep in shadow. What a darker tone this is compared to the rose-gold clouds I normally drift in. I've leaned into the unknowns, and I've chosen to embrace it all. Pains, grace, peace. I am blissful. They just go on and on like that. Last I heard, she somehow convinced the school to let her do a special graduation program in Hawaii, and now her dad pays for her to live a gypset lifestyle, which if I understand correctly is just flying all over the world on insane dime, doing whatever you want? I was on a school bus as a senior. As we stopped at a house, there was a dead dog by the road. The little girl getting off said to her friend who pointed it out, "Oh yeah, we got him this weekend. My dad will just get me another one, so it doesn't matter." I'm from a rich area in Dallas, Texas, so I've seen some crap. I went back for a visit and my childhood best friend was complaining that her parents were only letting her go to New Zealand instead of Amsterdam. Again, her dad is a multimillionaire and both of her teenage brothers drive Teslas. My male best friend was complaining to me that he didn't get to go to prom in a Hummer limo, only a regular stretch limo. He looked like he was going to pass out when I told him that I missed prom in high school to work a night shift. I'm glad I don't know either of those guys anymore.
New Zealand is awesome, so frick her, we don't need her here.
Dated a girl who was given a brand new car for her 16th. She had it for a lot less than a year before she crashed it. Her parents brought her a used car. She had it for about another year before crashing it. They bought her a third car, used, and then when her brother turned 16, she pitched a fit because he got a new car while she had to drive around in her used car. So he ran her over, right? Last I heard, she went down on him. I'm not even kidding. I stopped hanging around that family about that time. She did it, and she told me she did it. As for the why, well, apparently she was bored. I don't know her personally, but I'm still friends with a guy who dated one of her friends. I heard this from him. We all went to a private, expensive school in the US. The spoiled, rotten girl got a degree in journalism and promptly moved to London to find a job. Her parents rented her an apartment and I assume paid for her life for about 2 years before she was forced to move back because she had neither looked for nor got a job while she was there. Once back in the States, she refused to live in her parents' house, citing she was a grown woman. How could this be expected of her? Her parents bought her an apartment in New York City. Last I heard, she still lives in that apartment without a job, but has moved because it's in crappy Brooklyn and not Manhattan.
I'm an adult, guys. Now use your money to continue to support me in a new catered condo where I cannot lift a finger in peace.
My mum had cervical cancer a few years ago and had a full hysterectomy. She was out of work for a while and my brother and I had to work more hours and basically help out with the majority of the bills and groceries. My then-girlfriend at the time couldn't seem to understand why I wasn't willing to pay hundreds of dollars on a tux and prom stuff. She proceeded to ask me every day if we were going until I finally yelled at her and told her sarcastically that I was sorry my mum had a terminal illness and surgery to remove all of it, and that I was sorry I had to help out with paying the bills. She finally shut up about it and cried to her friends, literally cried at the school she went to, but told them I just didn't want to go. She totally left out the part where my mum was ill. I only learned that the other week when one of the people she cried to got hired at my job and told me what she did. We later broke up because she cheated on me and told everyone I hit her. I've never been in a fight in my life and I'm afraid to hit anyone because I'm a wimp. I guess prom overrules helping my mum with her medical bills. Mum's been well for about 4 years now. The ex has moved on to have 2 babies and she's not even 22 yet. I dodged a bullet. Ugh, my friend's dog. He used to barbecue a steak for the dog once or twice a week. Apparently the dog didn't like it pan-fried. The only human food my cat eats is roast beef, and only when my mom makes it. My cooking? He screams for it, and then when I give him some, he looks at me like I'm trying to poison him. A friend of mine saved up for an iPod when they first came out. Literally saved for a year to get one. His mum took him and his sister to the mall so he could purchase this. His sister started throwing a tantrum because she didn't have one as well. Their mum got so fed up with her that she bought the sister one just to shut her up. I've been that brother, it really does kill you inside. Just to make everyone feel good, I had a fist bump moment at the servo with a dad which started out rotten and turned awesome. His son wanted a Kinder Surprise and the dad said no. So the kid threw a Kinder Surprise on the ground and said, "Now you have to buy it." The teed-off dad pays for the said chocolate and waits for the kid to hold out his hand with a huge smile on his face before throwing it in the bin and dragging the now screaming kid back to the car. Most satisfying turnaround I've ever seen. When did someone try to force a "it's either me or them" choice, and how did it go? It's me or the business. I'd lost my very comfortable sales job and I wanted to try being a self-made man. After 4 years of covering all of our expenses, house, insurance, vehicles, vehicle insurance, groceries, vet bills, gas, utilities, and recreation, so that she could pay off her school loans, she was unwilling to cover our bills while I tried. I had a big enough severance to still cover our bills for nearly a year, and enough savings to use half of it to go in $15,000 with my brother on startup funds and still have $15,000 in the bank. She wouldn't even hear it, said I couldn't do it and that I'd fail. It's been 7 years. Last year, my brother and I made $350,000. I left her and didn't look back. Nothing feels better than being told you'll fail and then proving that you won't. Not my story, but a story of a bird we used to own. A large cockatoo that my mum brought for my dad. Truth is, the bird ended up loving my mum more than anything and would scream at everyone else and pick out its own feathers over stress while not being with my mum 24/7. I guess cockatoos can get really attached easily. Who'd have thunk it? Got so bad that my parents ended up giving the cockatoo away to some family acquaintance. The guy loved the bird and would walk around town with it on his shoulder and stuff. Eventually, he got a girlfriend, but after several months, the bird was being jealous and a bit of a C-word to the girlfriend. The girlfriend had finally had enough and told the guy, "It's me or the bird." The guy picked the damn bird. Actually, what probably happened with your mum and the bird is that the bird fell in love with your mum and was getting jealous or protective over her when others would approach. This happens because if you pet a bird anywhere else than its head, it mistakes the petting for love and affection, and it causes the bird to perceive the other as a mate. Look it up if you don't believe me. My ex-girlfriend said I had to decide between her or my cats. She lost. One of my cats had a reaction to meds for a toe abscess and chucked up in her shoes, and she went ballistic. They weren't even expensive shoes, but old ones that should have been in the bin ages ago anyways. She objected to the amount of money I was spending on vet bills, my money and not hers, by the way. We weren't living together and didn't share any bills or finances. I'd had that particular cat since I was a kid, so there was no contest. He finally died last year just short of his 26th birthday, lying in the arms of my current partner who spoiled him rotten. In short, love me, love my cats. 26 is an incredibly ancient feline. The oldest I knew was about 20 and that thing was the most frail animal I've ever met. A very well-preserved kitty. Follow-on comment? My husband's cat is a complete butthole. She has never consistently used a litter box and hates everyone but him in a hissing, biting sort of way. After a few years of living with me, she's finally accepted me as well and is only somewhat nice. However, he has had the cat since he was a kid, over 15 years now, and I would never ask him to give her up. We do come to compromises, like she mostly lives in a crate so she doesn't make the house a mess, but it's a huge crate with platforms and things to play with. He has to clean the crate, but we both get her out so she can run around and get attention. I know one day she's either going to pass on or get really sick. We're prepared and we have a plan in place of what we can afford, and at what point we have to let her go. My point is, if you marry a man with a cat, you marry the gosh darn cat too. I told them to choose between me or their substance use. They chose the substances. She told me it was her or my car, not in the normal sense of she wanted me to sell it. Money for me at the time was tight. I wasn't struggling but couldn't afford many luxuries and needed new tires for my car, but she wanted to go on a shopping trip. When I say needed tires, the fronts had turned into slicks. When I said I couldn't afford to give her money because I needed to put it into my car and explained to her it was a huge safety issue, she gave me an ultimatum. I chose my car and safety. My ex-wife once asked me to pick between her and our daughter. I told her she'd lose, and she ended up getting the help she needed with the postnatal depression.
Good man. Also, that's great that she got help.
Explain, please. Why was she wanting you to choose? I understand she had depression, but what exactly was she asking for? She either wanted to leave or for us to give up our daughter for adoption. She felt incapable of being a parent, and even after treatment, she didn't really bond with our daughter for several years. My dad's girlfriend witnessed me being bullied and mistreated by her brother and denied it for years. I told my dad it's me or her. I don't have contact with my father anymore. My dad came over and told me to choose between my fiancée and mother of my child or my family. I'm now married with 3 beautiful children and couldn't be happier. I still occasionally hear from my parents, but we rarely respond. I'm not the one missing out on my kids' lives, not my problem. To expand, my dad hates my wife for unknown reasons. He's made up every excuse in the book, from she's too picky to she's the reason I don't go to church. My family didn't start going to church till I was in 8th grade, and I stopped going sophomore year. I didn't meet my wife till junior year. He is selfish and has called my kids stupid. The last time I went out to dinner with them, he told me this great story about how he was telling a waitress that she should be my wife, and that there was just the small problem of my current wife, but she could be gotten rid of. He's just an awful guy who's really great at hiding his true persona from the rest of the world. I see through his BS, and he puts on a front to make everyone think I'm the butthole for not seeing him anymore. My wonderful in-laws have more than filled in for their absence. He also hates them and is rude to them. He told another waitress that I was dating some awful bride of Satan bimbo. Turns out that waitress has known my wife for 15 years. My wife is one of the nicest, sweetest people that I've ever met. She goes out of her way to accommodate others. My dad has basically convinced all of my local aunts and uncles and cousins that we're terrible people, so I never get invited to family events. So in short, Dad is a prick, my wife is not. I have 3 beautiful kids and I don't give an F about him. Either we open up our relationship or I'm breaking up with you. We opened our relationship and she broke up with me anyway.
I need to test drive all the cars or that one car on the lot I like the look of before I sell the car I own right now. Can I do that for a few months? That's usually what ultimatums about open relationships mean. I'm not even against them, but people are seriously dishonest as frick a lot of the times they ambush people with them out of nowhere.
When I was 4, my dad decided to buy pulped orange juice. I took one sip and was disgusted by the pulpy bits. My mum usually bought pulp-free for me. I told my dad I hated it, but he refused to get rid of it. I told him it was me or the orange juice. Next day, I came into the kitchen and in the fridge is a container of high-pulp orange juice. My dad walked in and told me I needed to get better at picking my fights. It's been almost 15 years, and even when I come home, he makes sure there's a bottle of extra high-pulp OJ in the fridge now. Joke's on him, now I actually like it. That's definitely one of the more lighthearted stories in this grouping. Also, I'm not sure if the joke is on your dad. It kinda sounds like he won. Anyone in the comments agree? I once had a best friend and a girlfriend who hated each other. While my girlfriend hated the dude, she encouraged me to be friends with him. The guy couldn't stand her so much he put me in the position where I had to choose one and say goodbye to the other. I've been married to the girl for 10 years and never talk to the guy anymore. Easy choice, much happier this way. I can't imagine having a guy friend give me an ultimatum over a girl. What the heck is wrong with him? We had a drummer, Scott, tell the rest of the band that it was him or me. They kept me and we renamed the band Scott Free. It's either me or the beard. You'd better believe that I kept that beard. Not so much for the sake of the beard itself, but because making that kind of trivial ultimatum is a major red flag.
Fun fact, the man with the world's longest recorded beard died when he stepped on his beard by accident and broke his own neck.
I've legitimately heard someone on my team break up with a girl during a game of Dota on voice. He was using open mic and she was like, "Get off that stupid game, take me out to dinner," in this horribly entitled voice. After about 10 minutes of him being calm and saying things like, "It's okay, baby, just let me finish this game, I'll get punished if I leave," and her just not understanding, she issued an ultimatum. "If you don't turn off that game right now and take me out to dinner, I'm leaving." And he just typed in chat, "Pause please, need to break up with my girlfriend." And everyone lolled and he paused and the guy just went freaking ballistic, like, "This is my apartment, you stay here on my dime, I buy you all your food, I give you money to go shopping. You don't get to issue ultimatums to me when you don't have crap without me. Get the frick out of my apartment, this relationship is over." Then it was lots of her crying and yelling and bringing up all this crap he did wrong in the past, as if that was going to help, and eventually he just said, "Sorry, relationship's over, I don't care. Bring a truck and one of those D-bag bar guys you love to go home with so much to get your stuff tomorrow. See if any of them are willing to clothe, feed, house, and do the deed with you." And everyone on chat just went, "Whoa!" And we were typing everything that was happening to the enemy team. He eventually got her out of the apartment, and boy, did it sound like the guy had a world of pressure off his shoulders. After the game ended, I befriended him. We still talk on Steam sometimes. He really ended the relationship and ended up just putting all of her crap in a storage locker when she didn't come to get it for a week. He has a new girlfriend now who apparently isn't as awful. She made me choose to obey her every whim or she'd leave. Turns out it was a power play. I called her bluff. I chose life. My crazy girlfriend said I was obsessed with my GameCube and said she'd leave if I kept it in the games or sell it and she stays. Currently, I'm living a happy life with my GameCube, controllers, games, and my other consoles and games. I don't know what happened to her. Was her name Sega Saturn? I worked at a care facility where I couldn't keep my own personal cell phone on me, but would carry around a work phone as I worked with clients. My friends and family all knew that I was pretty unreachable when I was at work because of this, but for some reason my boyfriend couldn't understand it. He'd get annoyed at me for not responding to his texts or calls to the point he'd drive by and make sure my car was at work. He once left me a voicemail implying that he intended to self-delete since I wasn't there for him. He insisted in the message that I had to choose between him or my job. After I got him checked out, I broke things off as gently as possible. It wasn't so much that I had my dream job, but more that we didn't have an emotionally healthy relationship for him and his possessiveness was going to kill him. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Boyfriend wanted me to move in but was allergic to cats. He said I could either prove I loved him and was ready for an adult relationship by getting rid of my cats, or we were done. We'd only been dating for 4 months. I tried to explain that throwing out pets I'd had since high school was a jerk move that I wasn't willing to make after a few months. He said I was a silly child who loved useless, disgusting animals more than humans. We were done. I suppose it's hard to empathize with a cat if all they bring you is problems and itchiness. I'd hate life too if I couldn't pet any animal within reason. I tolerated even having the conversation because he told me he was allergic, which is a valid reason to have qualms about pets, but by the end I don't even think he was allergic. Just a jerk trying to pull a power maneuver. Years later, it turns out I'm allergic to cats. I laughed in my doctor's face when he told me to get rid of them. A girlfriend once told me I had to become a Christian or we could break up. We broke up shortly after that. Yeah, she would have to be a terrific lay to make me want to lie to myself like that, and ironically, knowing that she was that good at doing the deed would raise questions about the degree of her faith to the religion I was joining. Paradox. When I was 16, I got home from school, early release from my last block. My father was upstairs, in my bed, drunk, bottle in hand, and passed out. He woke up, and calmly I asked him to get up and take a shower, or I'm out. He told me to go and F myself and proceeded to drink while talking and arguing with himself over some alcoholic, delusional bullcrap. Completely forgot my presence. I packed some stuff and called my very dear childhood friend to come get me. Her and her mother helped me buy a Greyhound ticket to get out of state to my sister's. About 6-hour drive to the south, but a horrible 12-hour bus drive. I phoned my sister when I was an hour away. Talked to my mum as she begged me to return. I emancipated shortly after and spent a year with my sister working and getting crap done. Only thing I regret is being the youngest while all my siblings moved out in a similar vein. I was the last resort for my dad's bullcrap. When I left, he focused on my mum. Things were always absolutely terrible for all of us, but since he no longer had a selection to choose from, the only person he could bully was her. She passed away 2 years ago from melanoma after a long, grueling few sick years stuck alone with him before moving out. I came back around and aided and took care of her during treatments and sickness until the day she passed. But still, man, I regretted leaving him alone to destroy her mentally and physically. Double-edged sword, I guess. Glad I left to save myself from that situation, but I still can't forgive myself for letting her go through that alone. One of my best friends said if you end up with her, we're done. He didn't like my girlfriend, and that was his good right. But try to force my hand and you'll have another thing coming to you. I've done that to my best friend. I'm talking best friends since diapers, like a brother to me. He was starting things up with this girl who had a reputation, substance problems, restraining orders, stealing from everyone around her, that sort of crap. I told him that if he was going to trust me on anything, it had to be this. Luckily, he chose me. She's now in jail for trying to kill one of her boyfriends. Not me, but my husband. His ex-fiancée is allergic to dogs and refuses to take medications her doctor suggested. She told him, "It's me or the dog." His dog is his number one love. He chose the dog. I'm really happy because then we met and I love dogs. So it's us, our 2 dogs and 2 kids, living happily ever after. College roommates agreed I could get a cat and then they changed their minds. The cat was behaved and used her litter box. They didn't give a reason but said she had to go. I moved out. It's either me or your dogs. I chose my pups. No regrets. My ex-boyfriend said it was him or my dog. He refused to move into my place if he was living there too. I chose my dog. He was potty trained and overall a good dog, but he didn't like my boyfriend and therefore my boyfriend didn't like him. My mum gave my biological dad's mum the ultimatum of either going to rehab and getting clean so she could see me when I was born or choose her smack. Needless to say, I have no relationship with my dad or his mum. Some guy I was seeing told me I wasn't ladylike enough. He said I swore too much, announced when I had to pee, called him dude, and generally acted like a guy. I guess he wanted me to change, but I dumped him instead. I met a chick that acts just like you. 10 out of 10 would marry again. Well, crap. Find me a man who thinks like you. There are dozens of us. Literally dozens. I gave my former boss an ultimatum once. I could either have a vacay or I'd turn in my keys. I hadn't had a single day off in over a year and worked nights, weekends, and holidays. I got the vacay. I pulled that once. My grandmother offered to pay for a trip to Europe to make up for past offenses. Never missed a single day of work. Was never late, always worked overtime, hadn't even asked for a raise in 2 years. The plant was going to be shut down for a week and a half during Christmas, and I wanted an extra week and a half after that break, unpaid of course. I asked for that in August. He delayed until October when I said I was going and just needed to know if I'd have a job when I got back. I had a job when I got back. Not me, but a mate and I were playing Warhammer 40k. His girlfriend was there being bored, they wandered off and she gave him the ultimatum. It's either 40k or her. He came back in and she didn't. What is a mere mortal woman compared to the glory of serving the God Emperor of mankind? I can kind of get this actually. At this point, I have such a critical mass of wargaming miniatures and terrain that giving up my hobbies means losing or at least selling literal thousands of dollars worth of stuff. Regardless of whether she was worth it, it's just such a hassle to give a major hobby that you've had for years up. Also, who would force me to give up something that brings me so much joy? I've had 2 superiors tell me that if my wife ever told me to choose between the military and her, pick the military. You being home more often will aggravate the problems you have, not fix them. Source? They're both divorced now. I've always stood by, if you're the one that makes me choose, then you're the one that goes. I told my best friend she could either hang out with her new friend or me, but she couldn't do both. Her new friend was a mentally unstable former roommate of mine who attacked and threatened everyone in that apartment with a knife before being committed to hospital for several months. As soon as she was released, she came back to school, found me and my friend, and became fixated on spending time with my friends and going to the school clubs that I went to. My best friend told me that anyone who dared give her an ultimatum like that didn't deserve to be in her life. I just shrugged and explained that her new buddy put me in therapy and I was considering a restraining order. I was sorry, but I wasn't willing to allow that girl back to my life. She threw a fit about how dare I say something so manipulative. She spent the next week trying to trick or force me into going to social events where both of them would be. I went no contact with both of them. A year later, my former best friend tracked me down to apologize that she didn't know how crazy and mean my old roommate could be. She wanted to patch up our friendship, but by that point I didn't trust her anymore. That's pretty lethal to any relationship. A few years back, my mother said if I continued dating my girlfriend, it was proof I hated her. I guess I must secretly hate my mum because I ended up staying with my girlfriend, now wife, who is a saint and is literally loved by everyone else in my life. I didn't mention that my mother has severe issues, but perhaps you could figure that out. Needless to say, I don't come around very often. I was at this party a couple of years ago in the backyard in the city, and everyone got quite wasted. We were out on the street as well. When this group of kids, 10 to 12 years of age, came up and threw water balloons, yeah, I know, at us, and some of those that didn't explode we threw back at them, which obviously made them mad. An hour or so later, I came into the backyard from the toilet downstairs when I saw almost everyone from the party gathered up, and then one of the big brothers to these kids, around 25 years old, we were 16, had his hand on this girl's face and was pushing her up against a wall. And obviously, I wasn't just going to stand around doing nothing, so I pushed the guy away, and as he started to leave, he flew back and threw a forceful punch right at my face. So I went out for a few seconds and stumbled back. I had this liquor bottle in my hand. All I could think of was smashing it against that fricking idiot's head. And I started approaching him when my crying girlfriend, who witnessed everything, came up and blocked me, and obviously, as drunk and mad as I was, I kept saying that I wanted to smash him with that fricking bottle, and that's when she said it was either her or the fight. And obviously, I knew she said it to keep me out of trouble, and I loved her, so I picked the first. I had a friend who was saving me, even though she had a boyfriend, and chasing off girls who showed any interest. I started dating someone without telling her, and was given the choice between her, my at the time best friend, and my new girlfriend. Needless to say, choosing my girlfriend was the best decision of my life. We're still dating 4 years later and are as happy as an oyster. I have one real hobby, a live-action RP, full-contact boffer sport called AmITheA. Every weekend, about 40 or 50 of my friends and I get together and hit nerds with sticks. AmITheA was my only social interaction and is a damn good workout to boot. The girlfriend got jealous of me skipping out for 5 hours every Sunday. "I don't think there's room in your life for AmITheA and me," she said. "Oh, honey, I don't think you're going to like where this conversation is heading." What was the strangest way you've seen someone quit? My boss, in retail, called me into work for noon and was showing me how to check the company email and set alarm codes for the doors, and then gave me the password to his company BlackBerry. This was strange, and then when the regular guy came to start his shift at 1, he closed the store and came out with all his stuff and said, "I'm officially done with this company as of right now." The phone started to ring and I reached to grab it, knowing this was the district manager, and not wanting to confront him, he literally ran out of the store and I haven't seen him since. Apparently, he had just emailed the district manager to say he'd resigned and wanted no further contact. The other guy and me have only worked at the store for a month. Not my story, but my boss's. She worked at a very busy downtown restaurant and brunch spot, and the line would be flooded with tickets for hours on end. One day, one of the line cooks just stopped amidst all of the commotion, stood up straight, paused, grabbed all of the tickets off the line, scrunched them into a ball and put them in his pants. He then put his middle fingers up, rotated to face everyone who was watching in horror, and walked out. This has since become one of my favorite stories. Holy crap, working as a chef in a cafe that can get busy, just the thought of all the tickets being gone horrifies me. I used to work at a fast food place in a small town. We had the run-of-the-mill, so-and-so was arrested, guess he's not working here anymore, happen more times than I could count. But the best was when someone didn't show up for his shift. The manager calls his phone and he doesn't answer. It goes to voicemail. He changed his greeting to the following: "F you, I quit." Talking about co-workers arrested, back in the 80s I was working midnights. We had a co-worker turn to us at shift's end and tell us, "It's been a pleasure working with you. Turn and walk away." When we called after him asking if he'd quit, he said, "Not exactly," and went out the door. We asked the boss what was up and he had no idea. That evening he was on the news for robbing a bank and then being caught minutes later strolling down the street with the money. Turns out he had acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And back then most treatments were experimental. The company insurance didn't cover treatment, but he had read that people in prison were getting treatment for that disease, so he did what he felt he had to do. That is quite the workaround. I'm not sure that prison inmates were prioritized for that treatment. Correct me if I'm wrong, comments. My high school summer job was at Burger King. One year they put me on the schedule when I was supposed to be at sports camp, 6 hours away, and I said, "No, like I told you 3 months ago, I need those 2 weeks off." And they replied with, "Well, you have to come back to work, then just go back to camp." And I was like, "Okay." So I drove back home and quit. When I got home, there was a manager on the phone for me saying that they have a no quitting policy. I was like, "Okay, well, I quit, so..." followed by awkward silence. Then she hung up on me. We walked a guy we'd fired down to security, and he hugged the old security guard for like 10 minutes in silence. I was once giving a course at a company HQ in a room overlooking the front door. I was just explaining company law for engineers when the entire IT department left the building with their belongings in black plastic bin bags. Since it was IT department, maybe they were outsourced? My first IT job out of college was in a large call center for a large bank. I worked there less than 2 months and wasn't even done with their training program when they took me and the other 15 people that were training with me into a room and said, "We don't need you anymore." So security escorted all of us at once to the door. I had a guy who worked for me who was awesome at his job but believed in just about every conspiracy imaginable. He would go on vacation and people would ask where he was going and he'd say, "Nowhere. I just need more time to work with my magnets." He'd forward all kinds of stuff about big business suppressing technology, crappy internet videos of people who claimed they had built perpetual motion machines, and other things. Sometimes we'd try to point out the flaws in these theories, but mostly we just laughed it off. One morning I came into work and started unpacking my laptop to get started, and he burst into my office with a huge smile and said, "I'm giving ya my 2-week notice." I started to speak and he cut me off. "I double-checked everything last night and I've achieved over-unity. I just needed a different kind of magnet. That was my key. I'm out of here in 2 weeks. I wanted to resign right away, but my girlfriend said that the polite thing to do was give 2 weeks notice. I guess the world can wait another 2 weeks. I tried to talk him down, but he was insistent. Over the next 2 weeks, he continued to work diligently on his remaining tasks, but he had a perpetual smile on his face and declared loudly to anyone who asked that, "I've solved the world's energy problems," and that, "This is a revolutionary game changer." Someone joked that something this radical might put his life in danger, and he responded, "I've taken steps to ensure that if anything happens to me, my invention will still get out to the general public." His last day was almost identical to anyone else's last day at the company they resigned from, only he acted like the happiest person in existence. 3 months later, I got an email from him that was entirely in lowercase letters and looked like it was written by a completely different person. It was something like, "Hi, I was wondering if my position had been filled. If not, I was wondering if I could have it back. There's something wrong with my device. I think it's the magnets, and I don't have enough money right now to fix it. I need a job, thanks." His position had been filled. I tried going through finance to get another position opened because, all crazy aside, he was good at this job. But the vice president of development shot it down when it came to him in the approval chain because he didn't want employees to think they could leave and still have a job to come back to whenever they wanted. This was at a restaurant. The general manager of the place was fired for being a scumbag, pervert, moron. After he was escorted to his car, he drove back to the front of the restaurant, got out, ran to the grassy area and started pulling up handfuls of grass and throwing them at the windows, whilst screaming like a burnt child. I used to manage the tech support side of a call center for an ISP. I had one tech come in and put a 6-pack of beer on my desk and said, "That's that," and walk out crying. Crying? I usually only do that on my way into work. I do it at work, for efficiency's sake. My supervisor used to tell everyone at my last job they were easily replaceable. He was a former military guy and he tried to run the place military style. He'd threaten people, break stuff, and make unreasonable demands. So one day I found a new job and just quit without notice. He got a hold of my number and the next day he called me and yelled at me for being unprofessional. He said I owed him 2 weeks. I told him I'm easily replaceable and he should have no problem finding a replacement, and then I hung up. I should also mention that job had the bare minimum amount of employees to run the place. If someone called out, we'd all have to work at least 2 hours overtime to make up for it. If anyone took a week vacation, it was a nightmare. My quitting like that set the place back a few months until they hired and trained a new guy to replace me. Yeah, there's a difference between a rifle grunt and a specialist. I'm guessing the supervisor was probably in the front-line infantry to have gotten that idea. It's a long story, but our manager wrote up me, my friend, and literally everyone else who had worked that day because she thought someone stole $20 from her. My friend and I decided to quit because I'm not going to sign a write-up when I did nothing wrong and she's too stupid to lock her stuff up. I took the paper, simply wrote "I quit" and handed it back to her. I looked at my friend and he looks right at her, just staring at her. Then he slowly crumples up the write-up, puts it in his mouth and starts chewing, just staring at her. He turns around, walks to his car and drives away, still the whole time with the paper in his mouth. It was glorious. I had a friend who worked as a night baker. One night they wrote him up for being disorderly. They were sitting down at one of the tables in the dining area and they slide him the paper. He threw the paper in the air and shouted, "Nope," and then just went back to baking. They didn't fire him and he didn't quit. I don't know how he got away with it. I ran away after quitting. I was hired by a competing company, put in my 2 weeks and the boss got suspicious. He came by my desk and told me to follow him into his office to sign a non-competition form, basically saying that after I left there I couldn't work for the competition for 6 months. I was crapping my pants as I got up to follow him. At that exact moment, the phone rang. I picked it up and told him I'd be there in 5 minutes. I finished up the phone call, grabbed my stuff, and hauled it out the back door. They eventually did find out that I went to work for the competition and sent me an email saying, "Congrats on the new job. I'll have to stop by for a visit one of these days." Why would anyone sign something like that? If they didn't make you do it when you were hired, why would you do it when you're about to quit? What are they going to do? Fire you? After you've quit? I don't understand the scenario at all. I worked my way up from someone with no responsibility to running a department. Along the way, no one thought to make me sign one. The main reason I went looking for a new job was because they were doing mass layoffs. After they tried to fire my buddy, they asked him to sign one, which he then informed them was illegal and told them to go F themselves. This happened at the casino my friend worked at. She's standing there dealing blackjack, normal day. All of a sudden, the dealer on the next table over screams, "Blackjack! I win!" while dancing and pumping both fists into the air. His players are dumbfounded. After his victory dance, he reaches out with both hands and scoops up everything on the table. Everything. Yeah, that too. If it was on the table, it got scooped up into his bank. Cards, chips, lighters, all of the money the players had sitting on the table in front of them, even the money that wasn't being wagered. After he scoops it all up, he rips off his ID badge, throws it down on top of the pile and walks off the table, out of the pit, and out the front doors to where his friend was in the car waiting. It took surveillance hours and hours to find out whose money belonged to whom. After the fact, she found out that the guy's friend had been waiting out there since the beginning of his shift. It had taken him hours to deal himself a blackjack. In short, casino employees like to go down in flames. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Worked at a very fancy French restaurant. The chef was a master chef and thus he had the biggest ego of anyone I'd ever met. Chef was in the piano bar talking and having a drink with some horse racing bigwigs, Rancho Santa Fe during track season. Hard-working, mild-mannered busser is changing tablecloths. The chef just starts belittling him in front of everyone for a laugh. "What the hell, man? I just saw a bit of the table when you switched cloths." You're not supposed to see the actual table. If you grabbed the wrong size tablecloth, fold it back up. Man, you're so damn lazy. There are a lot of different sizes, so you grab a variety and use it on the next table if it was wrong. The chef said something else and laughs with a jockey, some hot women and some guys with back pockets thicker than George Costanza. I forget what he said that made everyone laugh, but this 20-year-old behemoth of a busser takes his apron off and throws it at the chef. The chef stands up from the booth like he's teed off and is yelling about how he'll lose his job. The busser goes, "Frick this job and frick you, you little turd," and decks the chef right in the chops in the middle of the busy piano bar, then walks to the back exit, grabs a tray full of buffed Rydell stemware, and chucks it into the wall and leaves. It was pretty rad. A terrible ex-coworker, Crazy K, told everyone except his boss that it was his last day. His boss, a real nice guy, eventually heard what was going on and walked over to him and asked if it were true. Crazy K simply said, "Yep," and stood up and walked out. This guy had serious white snow problems. Not sure where he is now, but I kinda miss the shenanigans, and I hope he's found help. Other stories include continually complaining about being underpaid. He was making 6 figures, which is above average for the position and skill level experience. To illustrate his poorness, he would loudly count coins at his desk by dumping handfuls onto it and sliding them one by one into his hand. This was performed multiple times daily. It was the best for the company, but Crazy K was my primary source of entertainment at work. He would bring girlfriends, very trashy-looking working girls, to our upscale holiday parties. He got 2 of them pregnant, proposed to both, they each took the ring and ran off to southern states and sued him for child support. One of the previously mentioned working ladies at a holiday party was named La Fonda. Yes, seriously. This was about 2 years after Napoleon Dynamite came out and everyone was laughing about it. On a whim, he bought 2 brand new cars in a week, but had to sell them both about a month later. He picked up another lady of the night at a work event using Craigslist on his BlackBerry. Was quite proud of this. I mean, I've had this kind of coworker without the overt wealth. They're very entertaining, if nothing else. I'd planned to quit a job once, and it just didn't take. I picked up a 3rd job at a cafe during undergrad that required me to be in at 6:30 a.m. I thought I could do it. I gave it a try for a few weeks, but it was quickly becoming apparent that I liked drinking and sleeping in on Saturday a whole lot more than the extra cash. Anyway, I woke up hungover in a beautiful girl's bed and decided, screw it, I'm not going in, and went back to bed. I know, I should have called, but I was 20 and working 2 other jobs in addition to taking courses full-time. When I woke up again at around 9, I had a couple of voicemails. I expect "don't bother coming in again, we'll make your last check" message, but instead it's the owners apologizing because my coworker had been attacked and mugged on their way to work, and they figured I must have shown up already, seen the closed cafe and just gone home. I didn't have the heart to tell them, so I went in the next day, worked, and gave notice. 2 managers, one who looked like Ross Perot and the other who looked like John Candy, were leading a meeting when the police came in and arrested them. Turns out they took a trip together to the next town over and beat a working girl nearly to death. Worked in a supermarket as a cashier when I was in high school. A few of my good chums also worked there as well. Cue the crazy lady who goes to my friend who's having a rough day to begin with at the register behind me, puts all of her crap up and he brings her up. She notices a lobster has somehow gone missing and accuses my friend of stealing it. Then he says, "Lady, are you kidding me? Why would I take a lobster?" She then proceeded to yell at him and demands compensation in some form. He's had enough and yells, "F this crap, I'm out. Lady, F you and your lobster." He proceeded to walk out of the store and punches a hole in the wall, knocking a display shelf over as he exits, with her wide-eyed and a silent store behind him. Turns out her lobster was left at the seafood counter. I had to fire an employee after I caught her sleeping in her cubicle multiple times, and then telling me that asking her to assist in other areas when we were slow was not her job. Her mum came in afterwards and came storming into my office in a huff. Picture this: a 40-year-old black woman in pretty good shape in skin-tight leopard leggings with gigantic gold high heels on, oversized sunglasses and cornrows in her hair, screaming at me, "You're just a freaking racist. I'm gonna send my lawyer at you and he's going to sue your butt. We got racial discrimination suit on our hands." I looked at her the whole time and never said a freaking word. After which she stormed out of the building screaming, "You're all a bunch of freaking racist N-words in here." My first job out of college was at a medium-sized company with a small IT staff. There were just 6 of us programmers until we hired the new guy. We were using this obscure language which you couldn't really hire for without paying through the nose, so they decided to do on-the-job training for this. So the new guy was a little older than me but had no experience outside of teaching. He was nice, sort of quiet and a bit quirky. The only personal thing he kept on his desk was this plastic goat. I didn't have anything on my personal desk either, so I didn't really think anything of it. Sometimes he would play with it a little, but it mostly just sat on one spot in his desk. Everyone needs some sort of stress relief, I suppose. A few weeks go by and the new guy seems to be picking up the language fair enough. He had coded a couple of screens, albeit with a little help. One Monday comes up and he doesn't show at the office. Our boss calls him and says you can't just not show up without calling. Not a big deal to me, I mean things come up, it was just a little unprofessional. The next morning I get into the office super early, which is unlike me since I'm such a late riser. He rolls in around his normal time and is surprised to see me, but I figure it's because he likes the quiet morning. We're there working for a couple of hours and the whole time he's fiddling with the goat in his hand. Mid-morning, he gets up out of his chair and leaves our little room. An hour goes by and I figure out he isn't around for lunch, which we all used to do as a group. I figure he must have had something to do. Well, he doesn't show up after lunch. The next day, no call, no show. A weekend passes and still he doesn't show and he hadn't returned any calls. So my boss had to call the police to do a health check on him. He literally sends an email saying he wouldn't be back. We all look at each other thinking, who in the world quits like that? Was this a spur of the moment or premeditated thing? We look at his desk and realize his little plastic goat is gone. He must have come in that morning to grab it, but was surprised by me into staying for a bit to cover it up or something. He hadn't done anything malicious to the code, he just wanted his goat. A guy I knew got an email for a meeting in the boss's office. Figuring he was screwed, he starts just destroying computer equipment, just messing stuff up like crazy. So he goes into the office, sits down, and the boss tells him he needs to go to a conference someplace and it'd be all paid for by the company. He didn't get to go to the conference. My previous company was so awful that we'd get new employees sometimes that would get the vibe very quickly and quit within the first few days. But the classic was the guy who never came back from his lunch break on the first day. Within his group in our company, his name, Greg, became a verb meaning to quit at lunch and never come back. So occasionally you'd hear a frustrated employee saying, "That's it, I'm doing a Greg." I wonder if my name is used for its infamy to imply any activity in a circle I'm unaware of. I just kind of love that Greg probably has no idea that he left such a legacy in a workplace he didn't even spend a full day in. I have two stories, one normal and the other not so normal. The first was a bus guy at Red Lobster that had had enough on a Friday night. He was in the middle of cleaning a table. Nobody was talking to him, nobody was yelling, and nobody had had any confrontation with him all night. Suddenly, he stood up and yelled, "F this place!" Took off his apron, threw it across the room, and walked out the door. Never saw him again. The weird one was a guy at a place I worked where we had unlimited internet access. A lot of people would Facebook or whatever. Turns out this guy was trolling chat rooms for underage girls. He left for lunch to meet one at a mall, and it wasn't a young girl, but a bunch of cops. They took him and then came and took the computer he worked on. My ex-girlfriend used to be a pizza delivery driver for the chain pizzeria. One day her boss was giving her guff and she said she quit. The manager said she needed to bring her uniform in. She promptly took off her shirt, threw it at him, she was wearing underclothes, and then walked out, through a restaurant full of families and customers. I worked at a bowling alley and me and another guy did all the legwork for the bar. Bringing out the food, collecting bear cups, delivering the beer, among other things. The old lady bartender never split a dime with us. She hoarded all of the tips despite only filling the cups. We didn't like it, so I mentioned it to the manager girl on duty. She wasn't a very good manager and couldn't handle situations. Her big solution was, "If you don't like it, take off your shirt." So without really batting an eye, I took off my shirt, put it on the table, and walked out. A few days later, the person above her called me in to apologize, give me my last paycheck, and offered to let me stick around. I didn't, but as a nice consolation I learned they started paying the other guy doing the same work a little extra, and he started making a portion of the tips. Screw that greedy old banshee though. After 25 years as an executive with a fairly large corporation, I threw the keys to my company car and my company credit card on the CEO's desk and walked home. Started my own business 4 months later and just retired after 19 successful and blissful years. My friend quit his job at a corner store by just walking out and never coming back. Before he left, he stashed an open gallon of milk on top of the radiator that hung from the ceiling. What are the strangest things you've overheard while chauffeuring the rich? Billy Bob Thornton was doing radio press for a movie about to come out, meaning he had to stop by 6 or 7 radio stations for interviews. He wanted to have a cigarette in the vehicle on the way to the next interview, but I had to let him know that our company has a no-smoking policy in our vehicles. He asked me to call the owner to make an exception, but the owner said no, and it's a $250 cleaning fee if he smoked in the vehicle. He asked to stop by a bank. Came out and handed me $5,000 in cash and said, "Here's for the whole goddamn pack." He smoked in the car for the rest of the trip. Later, I got up the nerve to ask him if that's the most expensive pack of cigarettes he'd ever smoked. All he said was, "Not even close." Never explained it further. I think about him often. Picked up a wedding party. Bride, bridesmaid, and bride's boyfriend who was paying for the wedding. They had a magnum of champagne and we drove around for quite some time while they snorted white snow in the back. They were using rolled up 50s and 20s, then tossing them to me in the front seat as tip money. I dutifully brushed off each bill and added them to my wallet, pretending not to know what was going on. The couple argued off and on about showing up to the wedding. Apparently, she felt weird about getting married and he was trying to convince her it was a good idea. Finally dropped them off at the church and he slipped me a matchbook with his name and number written on it. Yeah, it was the late 80s and I was a young woman, one of the only female limo drivers at the time in that city. I scored a sweet leather jacket with the tips from that night. So many weird stories. And to clarify, the bride's boyfriend and the groom were not the same person. A chauffeur I knew ended up driving around some big stars. He was a big guy, like 6'8" and super muscular. His best story was when he was driving around a few WWE, or WWF back then, stars, and they awkwardly asked him not to get out and open the door for them because he'd make them look smaller. I totally believe this. The WWE had an on-air personality named Tom Phillips that was like 6 foot. In order to make the wrestlers seem bigger when he was interviewing them, they always had him sitting down, or if they were standing, they were framed from the waist up to hide the fact that Tom was standing with his feet spread out. And this is why the narrator only goes out to the clubs with a squad of short kings. I'm going to digress slightly from the topic to bring up another story that was written to us, not about people in limos, but their close cousins, people who go to country clubs. I once worked at a really exclusive club in Massachusetts, the kind you have to be born into or have generational wealth to be voted into membership by the board. Drew Barrymore was a frequent guest and there was always a lot of tension between her and her ex who always came with his extremely young new girlfriend and wife. She wasn't super friendly, no one was supposed to acknowledge they recognized her, and seemed constantly stressed. I felt kind of bad for her. didn't seem like a fun life. Mitt Romney, Morgan Freeman, and a bunch of big-time athletes were also frequent guests. Someone got married at our club and spent over $2 million on the wedding. They flew out the event planners for Coachella to design every aspect of the wedding. It was a spectacular one and one of the most fun nights I've ever had. However, at the end of the night, the front desk saw the groom go home with one of the bridesmaids instead of the bride. I helped set up and cater this one member's garden party, a casual affair for them that must have cost tens of thousands. They had a well-known music group come play for their guests, and I got to play cornhole with said group during the luncheon, which was pretty cool. So many wealthy kids with rich kid problems and wildly different upbringings. Parents would constantly talk and quiz their kids on politics, history, science, among other things. One group of guys was challenging their teenage sons to come up with a business idea. The boy with the best idea would receive $1 million for startup costs. Kids talked stocks constantly at the dinner table. Teenagers would come to eat with their friends, drink, and drop a casual 15 grand bill on their parents' tab. Just such a stark contrast from the way I was raised, where money was a taboo topic and my weekly $2 allowance for a week's worth of chores made me feel rich. It was a small island with an equally small nightlife, so for fun we'd grab a drink and an ice cream cone and hop on the yachts and sailboats parked at the docks. We'd just explore and pretend we were sailors or captains for the night. Once we hopped on Johnny Depp's super yacht while he was out for dinner. We actually managed to hang out for a hot minute before security finally kicked us off. While out looking for a tennis partner, I met this truly lovely couple who basically adopted me. I would bike to their house to play matches on their backyard tennis court every day. They loved to take me out to eat at these incredible restaurants. As a foodie, I was in heaven. They let me drive their cars on the beach, use their surfboards, drive their jet ski. I ran out of gas in the middle of the ocean and I had to get rescued by the Coast Guard, and they took me out on their yacht and even flew me out on their private jet to nearby islands to explore in the morning, and then would fly me back in time for my job at the club. They were the most kind and wonderful people and never asked for anything but my company in return. I think they missed their daughters, who both lived out of state. I fell out of touch with them, but I think of them often and I hope they're doing well. A friend of mine worked for an upscale concierge chauffeur service. His most memorable moment came when he lost Marie Osmond. Fairly simple gig, go to the airport and pick up Marie Osmond, who was to be the featured entertainer at a private event. The plane comes in, he meets her, and she has a carry-on bag, but her checked suitcase containing her stage dresses and makeup was missing. She was unflappable though, asks to be taken to the nearest upscale mall. He does as instructed. She goes into a large upscale department store, selects 2 long sequined cocktail dresses, and goes to the fitting room to try them out, without him of course. Unfortunately, there are 2 entrances and exits to the fitting room, and Marie Osmond exits out through the other side and can't find my chauffeur buddy, who is waiting patiently on the side she'd entered. 20 minutes passes. He thinks something has gone wrong, so he grabs a female manager and asks her to go into the fitting rooms and ask for Marie Osmond. The manager thinks she's being pranked and declines. Chauffeur buddy is in mini panic mode, running wildly around the store, asking random customers, "Have you seen Marie Osmond? Have you seen Marie Osmond?" Store security is summoned and he's asked to leave the premises right now. He calls his employer and tells him he has lost Marie Osmond. The employer doesn't have her cell phone number but has her agent's number and he is not accepting calls. She, in the meantime, has taken a cab to the gig, thinking she's been forgotten. Lots of apologies eventually ensued and there were no repercussions. When we were in high school, my friend used to caddy at a local country club. One guy really liked him and asked if he'd be willing to drive him around while he went out partying. This was like 2003 and in a pretty rural area. My friend agreed. He picked the guy up at like 8 p.m. Right off the bat, the guy handed him $200. He went to a bar for a little bit and my friend sat in the car. The guy came out, handed him like another $200 and told him he had to visit his friend real quick. He went and got a bunch of white snow. They went to another bar, he handed my friend another $100 and told him to look out the window and turn up the radio. He then blew several lines. He came out a couple of hours later with a girl. He was married with kids, by the way, and handed my friend another $200 and they went back to her house. After they'd done the deed, he came out and asked to be taken to the beach. At this point, it was like 2 or 3 a.m. My friend said the guy slowly walked around the beach, went into the water up to his ankles, in his shoes, and threw a bunch of rocks into the water and then sat in the sand for about 45 minutes. He came back to the car and asked to be driven home. When they got out of the car, he hugged my friend and gave him $500 and asked him to never tell anyone what happened. None of us really believed my friend when this happened until the guy he drove got arrested for a violent outburst and possession of white snow about 6 months later. You know, as weird and haunting as this event was, $1,300 US for a day's work is something that I would literally have brought a new car in order to do when I was in university. A buddy of mine ended up picking up a Netflix producer while doing Uber. He said they had a great conversation as he brought him to his hotel. The producer invited him up for a drink, and since my friend was a film student, he thought it'd be a good idea to try and get some good networking in. They hung out for about an hour when he asked my friend if he knew of any massage places with happy endings. He didn't, but the guy paid him $500 to bring him to the closest massage place, which was only a few miles out. Upon dropping him off, he gave my buddy a card and said, "There's a big party and festival I'm hosting. That's your ticket in. I'll let you know if I get that happy ending." He got that happy ending. Not a chauffeur, but this happened because of a lack of one. Basically, a guy I used to know back when we were teenagers, 17 years old, had a lot of money. We just never knew how much until I was invited to go on holiday with him and some other friends. All expenses paid, of course. Anyway, we took a taxi to an area where this guy wanted to buy an apartment and wanted to show us, so we went with him and ended up spending the whole day walking around the area. We got tired and eventually wanted to go back to the house, but we were so far away that walking was not an option unless we wanted to walk for about 3 hours. Neither of us had enough cash to pay for a taxi, and back then taxis didn't accept cards. This was around 2000 or 2001. So this guy rings his dad and asks if he could send a chauffeur to pick us up, but the chauffeur turns out was busy doing some deliveries for the dad. So the dad instead says, "There's a Mercedes-Benz dealer's shop near where you are. I know the manager there as I've brought several cars from them. Just go and buy a car with the credit card. You can leave it in the house and we'll figure out how to bring it home later." So we went to this dealer shop and somehow in about 30 minutes the manager did all the paperwork and we ended up driving back to the house in a brand new Mercedes C-Class, which we used for the rest of the holiday. Mine isn't something that was overheard, but something that happened. At least I hope nobody could hear it. A friend of mine who worked in music was in a limo with Robin Thicke and a load of dancers and models driving around London. We're all just chatting, and out of nowhere, Robin Thicke just starts going south of the border on one of the models. There was an awkward split-second silence, and then everyone just carried on and ignored it. Holy crap, I have a Robin Thicke story too. One of the administrative assistants at my work went to Vegas and met Robin Thicke there. He asked her at the bar if she wanted to come back to his room. When she said sure, he whipped out an NDA to have her sign. The guy cheated on his wife so much that he had paperwork drawn up so women couldn't tell on him. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I used to drive limousine and taxi. One time I got the manager of a fairly famous Canadian band in my car asking me where to buy white snow. I had no idea where and I told him that, so his bright idea was to find a working girl, hire her and ask her. I told him I couldn't help him pick up working girls either. He was disappointed but understood. He had me drive down a well-known street until he saw a working girl. He asked me to pull over, got out of the taxi, paid the fare, and then immediately flagged me down as a new ride. I knew what was up, but whatever. He gets back into the car with the working girl and she tells him what house to go to for some white snow. I take them there and wait a bit. They come back out and I drive him back to the venue. Then he offers me 2 free tickets to the show, which I gladly accepted as I loved that band and I'd seen them 3 times. Alas, I was still working during the show. I gave them away to 2 friends who had never seen the band. They had a good time and I had a fun story to share with them about how I scored those tickets. Not really a shocking conversation and hardly a famous person, but it was interesting how easily and full of trust people can be about searching out and buying substances in a strange city. For the record, this was 2003. My dad was a chauffeur back when I was younger, and he told me a story of driving the director of a company down the road with the Blackpool illuminations in the company limousine. The director was standing up out of the sunroof with his arms out, waving at people as he drove past. What the people on the street didn't know is that in the back of the limo there were 2 working girls going to town on his eggplant. Out of all the answers, this is the one that made me go, aye, that sounds about right. Frickin' Blackpool. I have multiple people pay me handsomely to let them smoke green herb in the car. Heard a French guy yelling at his wife that $10,000 was too much to pay for 2 bracelets that she brought. Also overheard a lot of business deals with absurd amounts of money referenced, like tens of millions. I've had conversations at work where I've said, just buy 2 of the gosh darn things, it's only $25K. Kinda crazy to go from that to debating if I want to keep my HBO subscription that night. My sister was in a limo once and asked the driver about his most interesting ride. The driver said that he'd picked up some models who were going to a AITA demonstration. I'd rather be bare than in fur, or whatever it was. He got to the location, they stripped down in the back of the limo, and he waited until they were done with the photo op. You know, I guess if you're going to go and bear it all for the public and be photographed to boot, why not get trashed in a luxury stretch before you get there? Drove limo at Marquette University during undergrad and grad school. Some of the students that went there were obscenely wealthy. Limos are the vans that drive drunk students anywhere on campus and a few blocks outside of campus. A couple of things I remember randomly from it. One, a drunk guy leaving his wallet on a van and another driver calling it so me and another supervisor could take it to campus police. We picked up the wallet from the driver and opened it to get the student ID so they know who to email. There had to be a few grand in there, and when we called the kid to tell him about it, he told us we could just keep it because it was too far from his dorm to bother picking it up. Okay. 2, I picked up a couple of girls from AITA and they spent the entire ride talking about how it was ridiculous that one of the girls' parents planned on making her pay for her own apartment after graduation, and there was nothing even livable under $2,000 a month. The school is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 3, Mardi Gras is the name of a campus ministry trip where you use your spring break to build houses and drink in somewhere that doesn't get snow in April. One of the people on my van was getting a free night of drinks from his buddies because he paid for everyone's trips. I think it was like $1,500 per person if I recall correctly. 4, it's a free service and a frat star tried to pay me for the ride with a Ziploc baggie of white snow. I said no and he called me a legend and left $20 in the cup holder before I realized it. 5, rich kids are rich, but foreign rich kids are usually on a different level. Was talking to a guy from Spain who said his dad did something with movies over there, I don't know. He had an actual Rolex on and ended the conversation with, "So anyways, do you know where to find any crystal?" Rich foreign kids are crazy. I had a Russian friend and I'd always just generally assumed he was at our university in Scotland on some kind of scholarship. He seemed to only own one set of clothes, was the top of the math program, and drank a lot of vodka. He did once try to sell me a submarine when he was drunk, but that happens to the best of us. He seemed to fit in until his dad showed up and they flew to Paris for lunch. This is not a limo story, but this thread reminded me of a rich guy story. My daughter played soccer for many years, and at one practice a guy drove up in a Ferrari, got out and started talking to another of the dads on the team. After a few minutes, the guy left and another of the dads went over there and asked him who that guy was. He replied that the guy was his lawyer or something. I came to find out years later that the guy in the Ferrari was a multimillionaire and had one and only one client, that dad, and his only job was to handle the dad's charitable donations. So this guy got filthy rich donating millions of dollars of someone else's money and taking a percentage off the top. The dad, who was apparently worth several $100 million, never came across as rich at all. He wore sweats to and was at every practice and game. He drove a Camry. He had been married to his average-looking wife for 25 years, stuff like that. Acted like a normal guy like the rest of us. One of my best friends used to drive Uber in a wealthy area of LA. He told me so many stories about drunk celebs and TikTokers in his car. Someone offered him a bag of green herb because they felt sorry for their friend throwing up in the back seat. Most people were just normal though. Some highlights: Quentin Tarantino and Trisha Paytas were baking out in his back seat when they were secretly dating. Mike Tyson is apparently very nice in person and also a giant pothead. Somebody on Gossip Girl and her friend were arguing about chicken nuggets and tried to get him to go through a Wendy's drive-thru during the lunch rush when there were already 10 cars in line. Addison Rae and one of her friends took their shoes off and left them in the car. Leo DiCaprio took more than 5 minutes to find the car. He seemed out of it and was quietly bobbing his head listening to music on his headphones. I had the distinguished privilege of working with a multimillionaire one time for a couple of days, and I was just astounded at how out of touch he was with people. One conversation, he was talking about how he hated all of the new homes they were building and liked old castles, so he was having a castle in Scotland disassembled and reassembled here in the US piece by piece. On another occasion, he asked me why I wasn't in college yet. The job was after high school and I was working as a plumber. And he gave an "oh, right," when I told him I couldn't afford to go yet and had to save up. About 25 years ago, I had a summer job at a very tony country club. 6-figure joining fee, 5-figure continuing membership dues, and that got you nothing but the privilege of paying top dollar for rounds, food, and the other services. I was a porter some of the time as we had cottages on club grounds for members to stay and make a weekend out of it. One of my duties was driving members to and from airports, usually private airports for private jets. One time I'm driving 2 guys to the airport and one of them starts complaining. Seems he and his wife are always fighting over who gets the jet every weekend and where they want to go. Well, the other one replied, "My third jet is actually just gathering dust right now since my son went to college. Take it off my hands?" They shook on it right there in the van. Very relatable. None of us know what to do with our extra jets once we've paid for a new building at Harvard to get our kid in there and he finally leaves. Good sweet lord, can we please eat the rich yet? A small part of my family was Chicago Mafia. Grandpa told me a story of a family wedding in Chicago they went to in the late 60s. They were picked up at the airport by a limo with some high-ranking family members. On the way to the hotel, they were stopped about 8 times by various police officers. The officer would walk up to the driver's window. The chauffeur would reach into a money bag and pass a bill to the officer. Nothing would be said and they'd take off again. Eventually, my grandpa asked if they were being bribed. His cousin, the one in the mafia, laughed and said, "No, it's Thursday. That's when we pay our boys." So I guess that's how they did it. A traffic stop and in the open where it's not expected. So I'd imagine that chauffeur had seen some things. I used to caddy at a fairly exclusive country club in Massachusetts. It's the kind of place where no matter how rich you are, you can't buy a membership. You're either born into it or you marry a member. As a result, a lot of the members like to show off their influence by inviting guests who'd otherwise be unable to play at the club. Someone invited Mitt Romney. We were given a heads up that the governor, he wasn't a senator yet, would be coming and they wanted us to know how to act around him. We were told he wanted to be treated like anyone else, but they didn't want us to gawk. So I guess to make sure us dumb caddies weren't gawking, we were instructed to not look at or acknowledge the governor. Because this is precisely how we'd treat other people. I did get to shake his hand and chat a little bit. He was friendly, personable, way nicer than a lot of the members. I still don't like a lot of his politics, but he seemed nice enough in person. I was driving an Uber and I picked up 2 businessmen in an industrial park. They were building developers. The man who was clearly the boss spoke to me as if I were a man and I was always the driver who picked him up. Although they were clearly from the Middle East, they chose to speak English. Maybe they thought it was rude not to, being in the US, but if that would have been rude, I'm not sure what the rest of the conversation was. They spoke about the future of business as if it were all so futile, and how everyone will be either very wealthy like them or very poor, and how their children really won't be able to get jobs either, but they also won't need to. I logged more than 4,000 rides between 2015 and 2017, and that was one of the weirdest. The other weirdest guy I picked up from a dispensary. He was a really good-looking, very well-dressed and clearly well-to-do guy, but he was in some sort of mental distress. He wanted to visit more dispensaries but had clearly already bought the max. I got his hotel information through conversation and went there instead. On the way, he told me, in all seriousness, all about how his father was God, which meant he was Jesus. "Didn't you notice how much brighter the sun became when I got in your car?" He was serious. He also followed Guns N' Roses like they were the Grateful Dead. He thought Axl Rose was the smartest man alive. He didn't really notice when we got to his hotel instead of the dispensary. I did ask him if he had taken any other substances that day, and he insisted he hadn't. That was also one of the weirdest. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.